Stream to fire up across the internet. If you're not familiar with the program, we do multi-stream in case you ever lose us. We're also on Facebook. We're on, of course, YouTube. But we're also on Twitch now, and we're getting a little bit of activity over there, which is a lot of fun. But YouTube always takes a minute to get started, but it looks like we're alive and well, so let's get going. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I over the course of many years have represented thousands of good people facing criminal charges. And throughout our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with our justice system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We have prosecutors behaving poorly. We have judges not particularly interested in a little thing called justice. And it all starts with the politicians, the people at the top, the ones who write the rules and pass the laws that they expect you and I to follow, but sometimes have a little bit of difficulty doing so themselves. And so that's why we started this show called Watching the Watchers, so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency back down upon our system with the hope of encouraging some meaningful change. We are very grateful that you are here and with us today. We've got a lot of criminal news that we're going to get into. We're going to start with the Senate committees. A couple of them were sort of going forward today, and they were diving into some of the Capitol Hill Riot issues. So we're going to hear from a couple people who were involved over there, the Sergeant of Arms for the House, the former Chief of the U.S. Capitol Police, and others. They were testifying today in front of Congress, and so we're going to break down what took place there. We're also going to be diving a little bit more into the Brian Sicknick case, because his mother came out. Brian Sicknick, before I jump into it, was the officer who responded to the Capitol Hill riots. He's no longer with us. He died. His mother spoke out and is unveiling a little bit more information about what happened with his death. So while Congress was also asking questions, we learned a little bit more from Brian Sicknick's mother. We're going to detail what that is all about. We also have a very high-profile arrest, El Chapo, one of the biggest drug dealers in the history of the world. He wasn't arrested today. He was arrested a while back, but his wife was, and she was sort of picked up at the Washington Dulles airport, and she's in custody now. We have her arrest warrant, her criminal complaint. We have the details about what she was involved with and why she was arrested. She was picked up by the FBI. So we're going to go through that as well. We're also going to be diving into this letter. There were two Congresspeople who sent a letter over to some of the big media, big tech companies, basically demanding that they do something to deal with disinformation, misinformation, dangerous information. And so they sent a letter over to a number of different companies, places like Fox News, One American News Network, Newsmax, and amongst others, basically saying, hey, you guys got to clamp down on this bad information that you're putting out there. And then they're holding a hearing tomorrow called a Fanning the Flames hearing. So sort of the Democrats are really going all out to try to curtail some of, in my opinion, your free speech rights. And we're going to break that down because it is kind of alarming how they're, I think, manipulating the argument to say that we have to do this to protect democracy. We actually have to limit speech to save America. Not that that would undermine the very foundation of America, things like, I don't know, the First Amendment. So we're going to get into that. And then we got some, expected news, garbage news, of course, about Daniel Prude. No charges for those officers. We spent a lot of time detailing that case. And Letitia James, the Attorney General from New York, came out today and said that they presented their evidence in front of a grand jury. The grand jury said, nope, no charges for those cops. So another handful of officers in this country are going to get away with what, in my opinion, was murder. No charges for them at all. And then, we had some Merrick Garland news. Not sure that we're going to get to it today because it's just not that particularly interesting. So we'll see what happens. That may develop as the show goes on. So if you're not a regular of the program, couple quick show notes. If you want a copy of the slides, then you can get those over at a different platform, not here on YouTube. It's called locals.com. So it's a different basically social site that you can go on. We post a copy of the show. We take questions that I'm about to go through in the different segments from locals.com/watching the watchers. So if you want to ask a question, that's the place to do it. It's also the place to get a copy of the slides that we're going to go through. And you can get a lot of other cool stuff as well. You can get a copy of my book for free. You can chat with people. You can post links. You can join the live chat. It's a lot of fun. So head on over there, watchingthewatchers.locals.com or locals.com/watchingthewatchers. All right. So let's get into it. The big news of the day, of course, is the Senate confirmation hearings. These were taking place out of two different committees. Our first story comes from the New York Times, and they were giving us some highlights about what was taking place today. So this was largely stemming around the Capitol Hill riots. There were a lot of investigations going on sort of simultaneously right now. We've got Nancy Pelosi calling for a 9/11-ish style of investigations. We also have sort of a lot of independent agency internal investigations going on. And then today, there was sort of a brief line of questioning from a couple different people who were responsible for security back on January 6th. And so we've got some clips. We're going to go through a number of different clips and sort of break down a little bit more about what was going on today. But let's just start with a high-level overview, and then we'll just dive in there. So number one, we have three former top Capitol security officials and the chief of the Washington police. They all blamed federal law enforcement and the Defense Department on Tuesday for intelligence failures ahead of the January 6th Capitol riot and for slow authorization of the National Guard. So Stephen Sund, somebody we talked about, he resigned as the Capitol Hill police chief. He said, quote, "None of the intelligence we received predicted what actually occurred." He called the riot, quote, "the worst attack on law enforcement and our democracy that I've ever seen." He also said he witnessed insurrectionists assaulting officers, not only with their fists, but also pipe sticks, bats, metal barricades, and flagpoles. He said these criminals came prepared for war. And so a lot of the theme that you'll see here as we go throughout this is basically kind of pointing their fingers at everybody else, right? You know, we weren't responsible for this. We couldn't have expected this, weren't properly trained for this, made requests to other agencies, other law enforcement people. You're going to see a lot of finger pointing going on here today. You're going to see things that were sort of sent over emails when they should have been maybe a phone call, given the severity of what we were talking about. And so really not many answers, unfortunately. I didn't watch the whole thing, but I sort of watched around and clipped around a bit today. And, you know, do we get any specifics? Do we get any, you know, were there stand down orders? Who ordered, you know, you're going to see, I'm not going to sort of put the cart before the horse here. Let's dive into some of the clips and then we can break it down piece by piece. So this first clip really shows, I think, one of the narrative shifts that we're seeing out of this entire investigation. So remember, when we rewind the clock back a little bit ago, back to impeachment version 2.0, the big allegation there was Donald Trump got out there on January 6th at the Save America rally, and he was inciting. Remember that? Inciting. Everything that came out of his mouth that day was incitement for the insurrection. And it was all sort of this idea here that Trump was creating this pressure cooker with a lot of his rhetoric post November 3rd, basically challenging the election, saying that there was all sorts of malfeasance going on there. And what he was doing is he was creating an environment that was incendiary, that was just ready to explode with the lighting of a match. And we heard a lot of that phraseology in the impeachment proceedings. And so that was the narrative during the impeachment. Trump was kind of building this thing, and then he got there on January 6th, lit that spark, and boom, the whole thing exploded. But the narrative shifts a little bit today. Now it's all about, this was really pre-planned. This was not just, incitement. He didn't show up there and just scream something, and then everybody got really, riled up and incited and then went and committed that insurrection. What they're talking about here is a pattern of pre-planning. This was all orchestrated, sort of a military style organization taking place. We're going to hear from Stephen Sund. And so you're just seeing how the narrative shifts. And so we're going to go through, we're going to play some clips. Then we're going to hear from Amy Klobuchar, who was somebody who was very vocal during the prior impeachments. She's coming out now and saying, well, see, we told you this is all pre-planned. It was clearly insurrection. And so now we're just going to see how this pivots. So now that Donald Trump, and you watch this through this lens, this is how I sort of am interpreting it. I'm giving you the conclusion before we get even through it, but just watch it through this lens. Are they shifting away now from Donald Trump as the big bad guy, right? A couple weeks ago when we were talking about impeachment, he incited the insurrection. Well, now it's like, well, he wasn't convicted. He wasn't actually found guilty of the incitement of insurrection. So now the goalposts are changing just a little bit. Now they're saying, oh, it was all pre-planned. It really wasn't much to do with Donald Trump. It was about white supremacy, right? It was about insurrection. And the narrative is shifting. So Donald Trump is sort of, we're going to put him back on the shelf back here. Don't need him. He was a useful folly for a little bit of time. Now we're going to shift it back over to the white supremacist and the pre-planned organization that was really responsible for all of this, because that is how the policy is going to shift. Now it's going to be about enforcing racial equity. Now it's going to be about criminalizing and prosecuting all of these individuals for their organized anti-government activity. And we're going to see where that goes. We heard some of that yesterday from Merrick Garland during his Attorney General confirmation hearing, where he was saying that, yeah, they're going to prosecute all of these people, all of these white supremacists. They're really being prolific with that word. And so let's just see how this narrative is slowly shifting. This series of clips came over from the Washington Post. So of course you want to understand where the clips came from, because as we have brought to everybody's attention, including my own here on this show, the Washington Post really is not a sort of center of the road journalistic entity, but they did a nice job clipping some various clips. But just keep in mind that, they're picking clips that serve their narrative. So I just want to put that out there. This is the first clip where we see that there was some definite pre-planning taking place as it related to the Capitol Hill riots.
Based on the intelligence, we all believed that the plan met the threat and that we were prepared. We now know that we had the wrong plan.
Even our best efforts were not enough to stop this unprecedented assault on the Capitol. However, casting blame solely on United States Capitol Police leadership is not only misplaced, but it also minimizes what truly occurred that day. We had planned for the possibility of violence, the possibility of some people being armed, not the possibility of a coordinated military-style attack involving thousands against the Capitol.
As a result of
All right, so we're going to get to his clip in a minute. Two things, right? We just heard from the House Sergeant of Arms, the former House Sergeant of Arms, who basically said we weren't planned for it, right? We didn't know, weren't planned for it. We thought we had a plan in place, but it didn't work out. Okay, which is, I think, understandable, right? Has anything like this happened before? No. Has the U.S. Capitol building been stormed before? Not to my knowledge. I haven't seen that before. So I can understand that, but at the same time, you are the House Sergeant at Arms. Your entire job is security. So was nobody thinking about contingencies on what happens, right? You're dealing with some of the most powerful people in the entire country in one building under one roof, and nobody thought about what might happen if there's a breach of the building, or if they're trying to kidnap somebody within the building or hold hostages. I mean, they've never war gamed any of that stuff. I have a hard time believing that, especially in the context of what they were claiming back during those days. This was back during mid-January. A lot of talk about white supremacy, a lot of talk about Enrique Tarrio, the Proud Boys. Remember, they came up during the debates in the election season, and there was a lot of sort of a bluster about that. So if they recognize that this was an ongoing threat, why were they not prepared? And he just says, well, we had a plan and it just didn't work out. All right, so thank you. Thank you for that. Then we get over to Stephen Sund, and he's saying the same thing. He's confirming that there was a lot of pre-planning that took place here. And he said it specifically. You just heard it in a military organized-ish fashion, right? He used more articulate words than that, but he basically said that this whole thing was coordinated, and they weren't prepared for that. They were ready for just regular everyday protesters. This looked like it had more coordination, which is basically the exact opposite of what we heard during the impeachment. Even in the article of impeachment, it wasn't just me making this stuff up. In the article of impeachment, the Democrats themselves, the same one that was introduced into the House and they prosecuted Trump with, was all about what Trump said, his specific language. If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. That was allegedly what caused the insurrection. It was the incitement that led the pressure cooker to explode. Now, that whole narrative is just gone now. Now this was all pre-orchestrated and all pre-planned. Then we're going to get over to the acting DC Chief of Police, and he's basically confirming that as well. Here he is in our next clip.
As a result of the ongoing investigation that's being handled by the FBI, as they continue to scrub social media, I think we're learning more and more and more that this was clearly a coordinated effort. The response was more asking about the plan, what was the plan for the National Guard? The response was more focused on, in addition to the plan, the optics, how this looks with boots on the ground on the Capitol. And in my response to that was simply, I was just stunned.
Senator, from my recollection, I did not receive a request for approval for National Guard until shortly after 2 p.m. when I was in Michael Stenger's
All right,
office.
let me get that straightened out. Mr. Sund.
So let's back up a minute here. So there were two things that I wanted to mention. So we just heard that. Well, let me go back here. I'm not sure how I broke this up. Here it is. Let's go back to this clip.
Do you know when you asked for National Guard assistance? Was it 1:09 or was it 2 p.m.?
It was 109, sir.
1:09. And who did you ask for assistance at 1:09?
It was from Mr. Irving. I believe he was in the company of Mr. Stenger at the time as well.
And Mr. Irving, why would you not remember that?
Senator, I have no recollection of a conversation with Chief Sund.
All right, so a couple things there. Number one, we just heard from the Metro Police, the very first clip. He said that this whole thing was clearly a coordinated effort, right? That was his own language. And so he presumably could have been called to testify at the impeachment proceedings. That didn't happen, but he said it was clearly a coordinated effort. And then when he went and tried to have a conversation with somebody about the National Guard, they were all talking about the plan rather than dealing with what needed to be done in order to secure the Capitol building. So as you heard him say, he went through it and he said they were talking about optics, talking about boots on the ground, and he's sort of having a conversation with this other guy who we just heard from. So we had the Robert J. Contee, the chief of the Metro Police. Then he's talking about Paul Irving, who's the former House Sergeant of Arms, which was Nancy Pelosi's house, right? And you can make this thing a political thing or not, but the point here is there was some concern. They were talking about it, and then it was a lot of dithering about, well, boots on the ground, what does the plan look like? The optics might be bad. Then we get over to, and I'm not sure if we're going to play this clip again or not. I think I might have kind of botched that, but he says specifically that they made the request and it just wasn't fulfilled. So let's go on to this next clip. Hold on real quickly. Let me see where I'm at.
We've received information.
All right. So I wanted to play that one more time because there's this interesting exchange that happens between the House Sergeant at Arms, and the Capitol Hill Chief of Police, former Stephen Sund. So they're going back and forth and they're having a debate over timing, over when the timing took place.
We've received information.
All right. I'm not sure what I'm doing over here. Here we go.
As a result of the ongoing investigation that's being handled by the FBI, as they continue to scrub social media, I think we're learning more and more that this was clearly a coordinated effort. The response was more asking about the plan, what was the plan for the National Guard? The response was more focused on, in addition to the plan, the optics, how this looks with boots on the ground on the Capitol. And in my response to that was simply, I was just stunned.
All right, so this is where we're going to get into the back and forth between Paul Irving, who is the former House Sergeant at Arms, and then Stephen Sund, the former Chief of the U.S. Capitol Police. And this is where we have some just deliberate finger pointing. So we've got two people who are basically adversarial. We have Paul Irving, who is responsible for security of the House of Representatives. He's a sergeant at arms. We also have the Capitol Hill police officer. And what you're going to hear is that they're talking about when the National Guard sort of got the call. When did they make a request for them to come and support what was taking place at the Capitol building? And we're going to hear from Stephen Sund, who says, yeah, I made the request at 1:09. And they say, you sure? Yeah, 1:09. I've got it right here. Here's the records. But then we go back over to the House Sergeant at Arms, and he's sort of like, well, I don't know, 2 o'clock maybe, right? And Mr. Blunt, who is Roy Blunt out of Missouri, he's trying to pin this stuff down. And so basically what's happening here is there's a 51-minute window that we don't know what was going on as it relates to the National Guard. And, that's understandable, right? They were in the middle of a riots. But again, it's just both sides kind of, no, I made the request. Well, I didn't get the request. Did you check your email? I know it was in my spam folder. I didn't get it. Sorry, whoops, right? And it's all this, it's just a bureaucratic mess, which is basically what we had suspected. So let's go back to this clip. I apologize for that rough transition there, but here it is.
Senator, from my recollection, I did not receive a request for approval for National Guard until shortly after 2 p.m. when I was in Michael Stenger's office.
Let me get that straightened out. Mr. Sund, do you know when you asked for National Guard assistance? Was it 1:09 or was it 2 p.m.?
It was 109, sir.
1:09. And who did you ask for assistance at 1:09?
It was from Mr. Irving. I believe he was in the company of Mr. Stenger at the time as well.
And Mr. Irving, why would you not remember that?
Senator, I have no recollection of a conversation with Chief Sund.
All right, so the chief of police, the Capitol Hill chief of police says, yep, 109, I had a conversation with Paul Irving, the House Sergeant at Arms, and I believe Michael Stenger was there, who is the former Sergeant at Arms for the Senate. So I was on the call with both people who are responsible for the Capitol building security at 109. We go back over to Paul Irving. Senator, I have no recollection of any of that. So, all right. Is that answer satisfactory to you? Okay. You know, this is why I think Nancy Pelosi's onto something when she says that maybe we should have a 9/11-ish style commission. Now, I'm not sure we're going to get any more answers other than this. If Mr. Irving doesn't remember it now, he's not going to remember it in a more in-depth commission. But maybe they'll dig it up and he'll come up with some sort of an answer on that. You would imagine that if Stephen Sund, the former Capitol Hill chief of police, is on the phone with them, and he remembers the date and what is being said, you would imagine that the two other people on the other side of that phone line would also have recollection about that. In this next clip that we're going to get to, we see here that basically it's a training problem also. You know, they just weren't trained for a situation like this, which again is just sort of mind-boggling. You know, the amount of resources, the amount of security briefing that goes into this place. I mean, haven't they seen... What is it? Olympus Has Fallen, right? Didn't Gerard Butler make some movies about this stuff, about taking over the White House, taking over whatever buildings around the world? Did nobody watch that insecurity on Capitol Hill? So here's this next clip saying they don't have good training.
We've received information that prior to January 6th, Capitol police officers were not trained on how to respond to an infiltration of the Capitol building. Is that correct, Mr. Sund?
When you talk about infiltration, you talk about a large insurrection like we saw on the January 6th? No.
So on that day, you issued rules of engagement that included what specifically? I'm an officer. What was I supposed to do if those barricades were breached?
There's rules of engagements that exist. They weren't issued just that day. They existed.
They don't vary from event to event based on threat analysis?
No, sir.
Yeah, so a couple hard clips over there from the Washington Post. You know, what I would like to know is... Did he just say that they have basically no contingency plan if somebody breaches a barrier, right? They set up barriers to protect the Capitol building. Do they not have a plan B if those barriers get broken? I mean, it would seem obvious to me. So he says, no, not on this scale, not on the scope of what we saw on January 6th, which I think is fair, it is accurate, right? I think this was something that was out of proportion. It was something that had not been foreseen, but at the same time, you would imagine that they would have some sort of contingency plans. And I'm not a security, IC type of person, but it would just make sense to me that if you're going to have the vice president, 100 senators, 435 House of Representatives, all the staff, everybody in that one building at that one date and time, that you would be a little bit more robust in your security. And I haven't really gotten any reassurance from anybody in this hearing that this is a high priority for them. You know, it's just sort of, we had a plan. It was just a bad plan. That's kind of what they're talking about. And we also now have a phone call comment from the Metro Chief of Police, the Metro DC Police. He's basically saying, yeah, there were some concerns that were floating around, and it just came over in an email. Maybe they should have given me a phone call. Here he is.
What the FBI sent them on January 5th was in the form of an email. I would certainly think that something as violent as an insurrection of the Capitol would warrant, a phone call or something.
So on January 5th, they sent an email. Hey, we're concerned about an insurrection at the Capitol. FYI, take a look at this if you get a chance. Maybe they put, please read with stars and asterisks at the top. Please read, because nobody ever reads emails. I don't know, but they didn't call the guy. They didn't call one of the lead security officials in DC, just an email. All right. Then we get a little bit more that they're asking questions about training. Here's another clip.
Question, Mr. Sund, can you tell us exactly how the Capitol Police preparations for January 6th differed from preparations for the protests from last summer? And if you can specifically address if they were the same or different use of force guidelines in place on January 6th compared to the protests of last summer, or any criteria for making arrests on January 6th versus the protests from last summer?
Okay, and if you could do that in about a minute.
Yes, ma'am. I will,
Thank you, Senator.
I will do that very concisely.
Okay.
So I want to look at it from planning and preparations. We plan for every demonstration the exact same way. Doesn't matter the message of the person, doesn't matter the demographics of the grievance involved in the demonstration. We do it the exact same way. We develop our information, we develop our intel, and we base a response plan on that.
Yeah, so I think where that line of questioning was going, that we've seen a lot of this type of narrative in the media that basically all the white cops let all the white people go, right? And that was sort of headlines for a long time. I think even Kamala Harris even came out and gave a big speech shortly thereafter, hinting at the same thing. Sort of, these racist white cops were letting all the racist white Trump supporters go, and I've been doing my best to smash that generalization. We've gone through a lot of arrests. We know that the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, Department of Homeland Security, all of these law enforcement agencies, including the Capitol Police, including the Metro Police, including local law enforcement around this country, are doing everything to round up anybody who's even tangentially related to the Capitol Hill riots. Even people who came the day after are being arrested just for their involvement, just for sending text messages across state lines. And so what that other senator was trying to do is just to say, no, yeah, we made a bunch of changes here because we were sort of lowering the line of enforcement because it was Trump and we like Trump. And that narrative, I think, is disingenuous and not intellectually honest, because that just is not the case. And I think it sort of undermines what the government is trying to do. They are trying to enforce the law, and we want to be sure that they do that coherently, and that the people who deserve to be rounded up as a part of this enforcement effort are they're the right people, not the grandma who walked in after the fact and was looking around with an American flag going, this is crazy, I'm in the Capitol Hill building, right? She's not an insurrectionist, folks. She may be in trouble for being there, but she's not an insurrectionist, and she's not somebody, in my opinion, who should be charged with domestic violent terrorism and given 20 years. There are some people, I think, who are responsible for some pretty heinous things. Anybody laying pipe bombs and trying to kill people, I think that's a whole separate issue. But we just got to be very careful, because right now they're they're over-criminalizing everything. And we'll see where that goes. Now, lastly, we get to Ms. Klobuchar, who is now coming out and sort of issuing a conclusion at the end of the ceremony. And here is how they are reframing it. So let's just sort of rewind the clock and go back to at the beginning of this segment when we were talking about the original narrative being Trump caused this and incited this. Now that's kind of out the window. I don't even think she says Trump's name here. Now she's saying this is organized by white supremacists. It was in fact pre-planned, and now they got to deal with that issue. So it's about the remedy. What are they trying to solve here? When Trump was the subject of this microscope, the solution was to prevent him from running again. That's really what they wanted. But now that that's not a possibility anymore, at least in the Congress, now they're shifting this. So now they have to sort of adjust the scapegoat to something else, and then they'll pass new policies to address that issue. And so what is Ms. Klobuchar bringing up? Of course, it is white supremacy.
Statements at the beginning from all the witnesses. They may have disagreed on some details, and, okay. But there is clear agreement that this was a planned insurrection. So, and I think most members here very firmly agree with that. And I think it's important for the public to know that. This was planned. We now know this was a planned insurrection. It involved white supremacists. It involved extremist groups. And it certainly could have been so much.
Didn't even mention Trump in there. Did Trump plan that? Like, was he sitting there sending text messages with all these white supremacists and extremist groups? Because it sounded like that was the argument a couple weeks ago, but not so much anymore. Now this was all orchestrated and coordinated by those groups that she mentioned. So some reaction. We saw this posted over today from BeckerNews.com, and this is saying that the ex-Capitol Police Chief testimony blows up the Dem narrative about Capitol riot attacks. So the former Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund provided explosive testimony to the U.S. Senate that runs directly against the Democrats' narrative about the Capitol riots. Sund, who was forced to resign, said that the Democrats knew there was a high potential for a riot with the capacity for violence, but due to concerns about, quote, the optics of the situation, the House Sergeant-at-Arms did nothing to stop it. The former Capitol Chief of Police testimony has been indispensable in establishing that there was plenty of advance warning. Sund earlier stated that the House was warned 6 times about the pending danger. He revealed the resources to the Capitol Police requested, including a stronger National Guard presence in a resignation letter aimed directly at Pelosi, which we covered. Furthermore, concrete intelligence from earlier December suggested that foreign influence was in the origins of the planned Capitol building assault. It has since been reported by CBS News' Catherine Herridge. So now we got some, what is this, Russian interference? Everyone in D.C. had to have known about the powder keg, just like it was following Trump's election and his inauguration, which also saw violent and destructive rioting. On one hand, so this is analysis now, on one hand, the gap between the intelligence indicating the high potential for a riot act, along with far-right plans. On the other hand, we have a complete inaction by the House and Senate leadership saying that this is a chasm that raises profound questions. One of the foremost questions regarding what Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats knew about the riot and their concerns about the optics of the events. So we had a couple quotes here from Sund, which we've already basically gone through. It says here, he says there was a clear lack of accurate and complete intelligence across several federal agencies that contributed to this event and not poor planning by the United States Capitol Police. We rely on accurate information from our federal partners to help us develop effective security plans. So that's a quote from Sund. So once again, just kind of pointing the fingers elsewhere. And might be very rightful, right? He may be absolutely right, but you're going to see how this goes. One government agency blaming another. The intelligence that we based our planning on indicated that the January 6th protests were expected to be similar to previous peaceful MAGA rallies, which drew tens of thousands. The assessment indicated that members of the Proud Boys, white supremacist groups, and Antifa and other extremist groups were expected to participate on January 6th, and that it may be inclined to become violent. So this was all pre-January 6th intelligence, and this is a quote from him today at the hearing. So he specifically calls out the Proud Boys, which for some reason is considered to be a white supremacist group. But then we also have a different category of white supremacist groups, and we also have Antifa, and then other extremist groups were all expected to participate. All right. As recent as Tuesday, January 5th, Sund said, during a meeting I hosted with my executive team, the Capitol Police Board, and a dozen of the top law enforcement and military officials from D.C., he said no entity, including the FBI, provided any new intelligence regarding January 6th. It should also be noted that the Secretary of Homeland Security did not issue an elevated or imminent alert in reference to the events at the Capitol on January 6th. We properly planned for mass demonstration with possible violence. What we got was a military-style coordinated assault on my officers and a violent takeover of the Capitol building. So you see how, we had a little bit of a snippet there. In that Washington Post clip, we properly planned for mass demonstration. We got a military-style coordinated assault is what he said. But before that, he was talking a lot about basically, the FBI dropped the ball. They didn't tell us anything about this stuff. And what we saw was a military-style coordinated attack, what we should have been prepared for based on our intelligence agencies, based on the billions of dollars that we spend every year to create our intelligence community. They should have known something about this. If it really was that coordinated, they should have known something, and they should have alerted him to that fact. And still, who knows what would have been done, because apparently he had already requested for additional resources 6 times, according to this article. So it goes on. It says here that on Tuesday, he told lawmakers he did not receive a copy of an FBI report warning of violence, and that was issued the day before the attack on the Capitol. The FBI issued a report on its field office on January 5th that detailed the calls for violence, including those that suggested protesters go to the Capitol ready for war. I actually just in the last 24 hours was informed by the department that we actually had received the report, Sund said in response to a question from Amy Klobuchar. The Washington Post earlier cited Sund regarding the responses to his warnings from the House and the Senate's respective Sergeant-at-Arms. Quote, House Sergeant-at-Arms Paul Irving said he wasn't comfortable, quote, with the optics of declaring an emergency ahead of the demonstration, Sund said. Meanwhile, the Senate Sergeant-at-Arms, Michael Stenger, suggested that Sund should informally seek out his guard contacts, asking them to lean forward and be on alert in case the Capitol Police need their help. So you've got Paul Irving, who is the House of Representatives Sergeant-at-Arms, apparently now being attributed that quote, that the optics just weren't right. And that's why they didn't move forward with that. So the Senate Sergeant-at-Arms goes over to Sund and says, go massage those National Guard relationships and see what can come out of that, because we're not getting anywhere here. So finger pointing Senate to the House, House to the Capitol Hill Police back over to the House, Sergeant at Arms, and around we go. There was an interesting clip from, this was, who is this? This is Ron Johnson over from Wisconsin. He's a senator today. There was a clip flying around on Twitter this afternoon, so I wanted to play it. He spends about 1 minute and 17 seconds kind of going through his own analysis from another individual we're going to tell you about, saying that a lot of this stuff seemed to have been infiltrated by external individuals who were intending to come in here and sort of play the part, kind of actors. This is what he said on the Senate floor today.
Thousands of people I passed or who passed me along Constitution Avenue, some were indignant and contemptuous of Congress, but not one appeared angry or incited to riot. Many of the marchers were families with small children. Many were elderly, overweight, or just plain tired or frail, traits not typically attributed to the riot-prone. Many wore pro-police shirts or carried pro-police black and blue flags. Although the crowd represented a broad cross-section of Americans, mostly working class by their appearance and manner of speech, some people stood out. A very few didn't share the jovial, friendly, earnest demeanor of the great majority. Some obviously didn't fit in, and he describes four.
All right, so he goes through 4 different categories of individuals who were there. So he's talking about this guy named Michael Waller, and this was posted over on thefederalist.com. And here is a little summation of what his arguments are. I saw provocateurs at the Capitol riot on January 6th. He posted this back on January 14th. He says the deadly riot at the U.S. Capitol bore the makings of an organized operation planned well in advance of the January 6th joint session of Congress. A small number of cadre appeared to use the cover of a huge rally to stage its attack. Before it began, I saw from my vantage point on the west front of the Capitol what appeared to be 4 separate cells or units. Plainclothes militants, militant aggressive men in Donald Trump and MAGA gear at the front police line at the base of the temporary presidential inaugural platform. Agents provocateurs, scattered groups of men exhorting the marchers to gather closely and tightly towards the center of the outside of the Capitol building and prevent them from leaving. Fake Trump protesters, a few young men wearing Trump or MAGA hats backwards who did not fit in with the rest of the crowd in terms of their actions or demeanor, whom I presume to be Antifa or other leftist agitators. And number 4, disciplined, uniformed column of attackers, a column of organized, disciplined men wearing similar but not identical camouflage uniforms and black gear, some with helmets and GoPro cameras, or wearing some Dude Punisher skull patches. All of these cells or groups stood out from the very large crowd by their behavior and overall demeanor. However, they did not at all appear at the same time. Not until the very end did it appear that there was a prearranged plan to storm the Capitol building and to manipulate the unsuspecting crowd as cover and as a follow-on force. And so, this sort of gets into that, the allegations here is anybody who's talking about this stuff is probably a conspiratorial person, somebody who's a conspiracy theorist. This is all nonsense. And even from my perspective, when I was sort of watching this all unfold, I just didn't really see any evidence of Antifa. Now, that may be because they were wearing Trump gear, and it's hard to identify Antifa or any other agent provocateurs that are disguised, right? They do not want to be discovered in that way, but we just didn't see any evidence of it. Now this guy is coming out. Now it's on the floor of the Senate where they're sort of asking these questions. And I think that they are interesting questions. I think they're pertinent questions that should be asked and should be investigated, because if there is any of this evidence going, if there is any malfeasance here, that should also be rooted out. Okay. If they were legitimate Trump supporters and they're responsible for it, they should be prosecuted. I've been very consistent about that. And if somebody was part of Antifa, somebody was part of BLM, somebody was part of another organization, and they just put on a Trump hat and carried a flag with a MAGA shirt on and stormed the Capitol building, well, we should know that, right? Because right now what's happening is what the Senate is doing by Amy Klobuchar's own admissions. She's saying these were extremist groups and white supremacists. So they're labeling who they believe to be the proprietor of this, the provocateurs, the insurrectionists. And so you got to get that label right? If it's more than just that, then we should know about it. And it sounds like now some people in the Senate are actually asking that question. So I'm for more information, more investigations, more evidence, more transparency, more accountability. But that means they got to be asking the right questions and of the right people. They can't just pick up a narrative that they like to run with and then start passing policies that are responsive to their make-believe narrative. We'll see if we get there. Now, this guy is not just some random blogger, okay? J. Michael Waller is a senior analyst for strategy at the Center for Security Policy. So this is his day job, senior analyst. His areas of concentration are propaganda, political warfare, psychological warfare, subversion. He's a former professor at the Institute of World Politics, a graduate school in Washington, D.C. He's a former instructor with the Naval Postgraduate School. He's an instructor lecturer at the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and school at Fort Bragg. Okay, so that is when I sort of am sort of pontificating here about this stuff, at least in terms of an intelligence operation. Right? That's not my expertise, but this guy, that is his expertise. And so he's coming out now and saying, well, we saw some anomalies. We saw some weird things happening, and I think it's worth investigating. Now, we also have some other information about this. When I talk a lot about narratives, when I talk a lot about the media sort of just spitting out propaganda largely, they're coming to conclusions that are not based on facts. They're doing it to put forward a political end. And weeks and months pass by, and suddenly we learn that it's not actually what they said it is. It's not actually true. What they were reporting on is fake news. It's not real. And today there was a breaking story. This came over as an exclusive from the Daily Mail. And they are saying they had a conversation with Brian Sicknick, his mother, and she's saying that, no, it probably wasn't directly related to the Capitol Hill riots. His death wasn't directly related to it. Here is this article. It says, he was the martyred face of the Capitol riot, but now the mother of the hero cop, Brian Sicknick, says she believes her son died of a fatal stroke, not a fire extinguisher to the head, while authorities won't say a word. And so we're going to go through this story. The framing here is, I don't want to make Officer Brian Sicknick's death a political statement at all. I have no intention of doing that. We keep talking about it because the government is not telling us more information about what happened. That is really my problem with this. If the MAGA protesters killed Officer Brian Sicknick, they should be condemned totally and they should be prosecuted. If they didn't, then we got to be very clear that nobody is being prosecuted for something that they didn't do. If they're going to be using his death as sort of this political bludgeon against all of the Capitol Hill rioters, we got to be careful about that, because there are going to be people who are going to prison and going to jail as a result of just being there, just being in that general vicinity. We've already covered several different individuals who've been indicted on a federal level because they were in the area sending text messages. And so what the Justice Department is doing right now is they are building cases that they are going to be moving forward and prosecuting. And the public, as far as we can tell right now, thinks that the MAGA people went and threw a fire extinguisher at this officer and killed him. That's not true. And you got to understand that when people are going through the criminal justice system, they're going to be judged or potentially judged, if their case goes to a jury trial, by a jury of their peers. And a lot of people here are hearing bad information. They're hearing basically lies from the media that is continuing to put forward this false narrative that the MAGA people killed Officer Sicknick. And that just doesn't look like it's true. And the government, this is my ultimate problem with this, is that they're not giving us any more information about it. They could come back out. They've done an autopsy. He's already been cremated, and they could give us more information. His own mother doesn't have any information about how he died. Let's go into this story. Here it is. The mother of the U.S. Capitol Police officer who died following the January 6 riots believes that her son succumbed to a fatal stroke, that he was not bludgeoned to death by a fire extinguisher as reported. Yet more than 1 month after Officer Sicknick's death on January 7th, she has admitted that they are still in the dark as to what exactly caused that catastrophic episode. Speaking exclusively to the Daily Mail, we have Gladys Sicknick, who's 74, was unequivocal in her assertion that Officer Brian Sicknick was not struck in the head, and that as far as the family knows, her son had a fatal stroke. Right? And that's awful. That's terrible. I empathize with the Sicknick family. I hope they recover well. I'm sorry for their loss. But that's a big difference between MAGA murdered a police officer and officer had a stroke after some interaction, after the Capitol Hill interaction. And you could even say, yeah, maybe it was the stress, it was the pressure, it was the adrenaline. Who knows? Okay, I'm not a medical doctor either. So there could be a number of reasons as to how, at least legally, you could make the connection that they did result, they did kill him because they caused the protest. He showed up at the protest. His body didn't respond well to that, and he died. So you could say, yes, if you wanted to be very granular on causation, you could say that had that not happened, maybe he would not have died, but maybe he would have. Maybe he would have just gotten up and gone to work just the regular day, no riot at the Capitol building. The next morning, January 7th, he has a stroke. It's a tragic thing. But what they're trying to do is create this false equivalency between two things that just hasn't been proven yet. And the government is not telling us what happened here. And they're also not telling his own mother, who's 74 years old. God bless her. She said he wasn't hit in the head. No, we think he had a stroke, but we don't know anything for sure. We'd love to know what happened. So would we. We have, it says here, because while politicians have grandstanded and rushed to judgment, no one yet has given the family the answers they need. The first reports that an officer had been killed were premature and emerged on January 6. U.S. Capitol Police were swift to issue a denial, even though the New York Times and many others ran with them until very recently. It is now known that Officer Sicknick was on life support at the time, and his death was confirmed barely 24 hours later at 9:30 on January 7th. The official statement was measured and vague as to the cause. According to the police, he passed away due to injuries sustained while on duty. And we read through that, and I think that is still up for debate. Daily Mail has confirmed with Douglas Buchanan, the chief of communications for D.C.'s Department of Fire and Emergency, that Sicknick was not rushed to the hospital from the Capitol, but indeed returned to his division department as stated. In fact, that very day, the New York Times account ran Sicknick's own brother, Ken, spoke with ProPublica and said that his brother had been in good spirits and had texted him after returning to the department. He said, he texted me last night and said, I got pepper sprayed twice and he was in good shape. It continued. Officer Sicknick was responding to the riots on Wednesday at the Capitol and was injured while physically engaging with protesters. He returned to the division and collapsed. He was taken to the hospital where he succumbed to his injuries. Yet despite this statement, which was issued on January 7th, the following day on January 8th, the New York Times were reporting that pro-Trump supporters overpowered Mr. Sicknick, struck him in the head with a fire extinguisher, according to two law enforcement officials. So who are those? With a bloody gash in his head, Mr. Sicknick was rushed to the hospital and placed on life support, which is just not accurate. The New York Times said that's just not right. If they have two law enforcement officials who said that, who are they? Well, they're not going to reveal their sources, but we got some straight lies going on here in the New York Times, and they were doing it for a political reason. This is not just, oh, sorry, we misspelled your name. No. There's a clear narrative that they want to ensure is making it into the headlines. This was the same narrative, by the way, that also appeared in the Democratic, in their memorandum that supplemented their article of impeachment. Why? Because it's a good talking point. It's a good narrative. It serves their political ends. And so they wanted to milk the hell out of it. The same day, January, which is sick, by the way. It's sick that they would want to milk this man's death for their political ends. On January 8th, Sicknick's father, Charles, 81, told Reuters that on January 7th, as they rushed from their homes in New Jersey to D.C., the family were told that Sicknick had a blood clot on his brain, had suffered a stroke. He was being kept alive on a ventilator, but was dead by the time they got there. Yet these few publicly available facts were bulldozed over by political fervor, and it was the unattributed account of a brutal attack, also reported by the Associated Press, that gained traction less than 24 hours after his death, with no autopsy, no confirmation of any sign of blunt trauma, no investigation, nor due process. House Speaker Pelosi called for the perpetrators of Sicknick's attack to be brought to justice and avowed, we will never forget. And we saw this basically 24/7. Trump, MAGA people killed and murdered a police officer. Everybody was just head over heels excited with the fact that they could pin Trump supporters with the murder of a cop. And there was no evidence for it. Zero. The media was already prosecuting and convicting an entire group of people without any evidence. And now that it's sort of coming out, it's still pretty hush-hush about that. All right, it goes on. On January 10th, when video emerged of a rioter hurling a fire extinguisher towards law enforcement on the steps on the Capitol, it was co-opted into the narrative of evidence of the protesters' lethal force. 4 days later, retired Philadelphia firefighter Robert Sanford, 55, was arrested as the rioter in the video. His charges included assault of a police officer, disorderly conduct, civil disorder, unlawful entry. The fire extinguisher he hurled, reported by the AP to have bounced off the heads of 3 officers, two of whom were wearing helmets. None of the charges related to Officer Sicknick, yet the narrative continued to run unchecked, with not one leader acknowledging the ongoing investigation or the complete absence of any certainty amid the melee of misreporting. Today, more than a month after his death, the medical examiner has yet to return a cause of death. There it is. Medical examiner has yet to return a cause of death, and the FBI and the federal prosecutors are struggling to put together a murder case. Last week, it emerged that new video evidence is being examined in a bid to identify the suspects. We covered that. And anything that might help establish what led to his death. A death is still being treated as a homicide despite evidence of a cause of death or any persons of interest. Unconfirmed reports suggested investigators are now considering an adverse reaction to the bear spray with which rioters sprayed cops as a potential factor. If Officer Sicknick was suffering any such ill effects from inhaling the chemicals that clouded the air that day, he was unaware of them or simply did not seek treatment at the scene. But speaking to Reuters shortly after his son's death, Sicknick's father, Charles, 81, said that his son has been resuscitated twice on the way to hospital and placed on a ventilator on arrival. So you can just see, right? They're asking questions. They're investigating these guys. They're all just pointing fingers at one another, and we still don't have almost any evidence. We have no real indication about what happened here. The Metro Police Chief, he got an email. We have a phone call from Stephen Sund over to Paul Irving, the Sergeant at Arms in the House. He says, oh, I remember that call, which was a pretty important call on a pretty important day. Just don't remember it. But the Senate Sergeant at Arms was also there too. So, all right. I guess we're going to continue to just kind of play patty cake with this whole thing, and they're going to continue to talk about whatever they want to talk about. Let's jump into some questions. We've got Nadarb Lasir says, also, why do they need these hearings? I thought they already knew what caused this. I thought Trump caused the whole thing, so no need for a whole investigation, right? Yeah, right. That's exactly what they said, but not anymore, though. Because Trump got acquitted, he wasn't convicted. So now apparently it wasn't him. Now it's white supremacist and extremist groups, which, by the way, serves their interests pretty nicely. Because now they're going to be able to pass a bunch of legislation now that they really got to the bottom of this. Now it's not Trump. Oh, whoops, sorry. We went through a whole impeachment proceeding, but we knew, and you knew, and all of the law enforcement agencies on DC, they knew as well that there is a massive pre-planned or non-organic military-style operation that was already well underway before January 6th. We all knew that, but apparently we just had to go through the Trump debacle for giggles. We have another one from Just XUXA. Have they figured out how many people were in DC for the rally? You know, I don't know that I saw a final number on that. A lot. I don't really know how many were there. Good question, though. Sharon Quidney says, this whole thing just serves their political agenda. I just wish somebody would stand up and say, hey, I thought it was all Trump's fault. Why doesn't somebody just stand up and call them out on that? Yeah. Well, I don't know, because this is all political security theater, in my opinion. You know, it's a spectacle that they're just going to call them up. We ask them questions. They're all going to point fingers at each other, and who knows if anything changes. I think that there should be a much deeper investigation into it. I think that this was a catastrophic failure that something needs to happen to somebody over this stuff. Now, a lot of people have resigned and been fired, but you know, we're talking about a very serious situation, and it feels like the government was grossly negligent in preventing it from happening. Multiple failures across multiple agencies, multiple sergeant of arms, 2 different police departments, an FBI, and others who all failed to prevent this thing. What the hell are they doing if they can't even protect a building in our homeland, in the heart of Washington, D.C.? We expect them to go out and govern military operations across the world when they can't even protect a single building with massive amounts of intelligence that they can gather from everything that's going on in this country. It's embarrassing. We have Pinky2 says, if it was a phone call, don't they have the ability to see that? If they asked, yeah, I think so, Pinky. If they asked the questions, if they said, okay, all right, Mr. Irving, we're going to subpoena your phone records. Apparently, you don't remember that call. Stephen Sund does remember that call. He's looking at some sort of a record. Is that his phone log? I don't know. Maybe he pulled his records from whatever, network he's on, and now he can refer back specifically to this date and time at this location. This is what I said. What happened to the other guy? Why doesn't he remember that call? Jeremy Matrita says, I would like to know your opinion on the use of selective amnesia as a defense in a criminal defense. Not a good defense. Doesn't work. Little creative, No, I don't remember. It's strange, right? Happens a lot though. This happens all the time. I don't know. This usually happens not really in a criminal trial because you sort of work these issues out. But yeah, when you're in a congressional hearing, you suddenly have I have no recollection. Hey, I'm Paul Irving. Hey, you were there at the Capitol building that day, right? It was one of like the most traumatic things that's ever happened in this country, at least in your lifetime. Right? You were there, you're responsible for security. This is your entire job to make sure this stuff doesn't happen. And you can't recall a phone call that came in on that day. You don't remember talking to Stephen Sund about this at 1:09 or 2 or 2:50 or whatever. All right. So maybe he has amnesia. Maybe he's got dementia. Who knows? But he certainly should not be in any security apparatus anytime ever again, because he can't remember anything that happened on a very important day. We have Sharon Quidney says the infiltration slip was interesting. Could it be that there was somebody on the inside helping out? If not, why the videos of cops letting people into the building? Good question. And actually, I saw another headline today that we didn't get to, but we're going to see if we can get it tomorrow. There's a new evidence. I don't know the details of the story, but apparently I think the FBI is actually pulling congressional phone records now. So they got a subpoena and they're going to be diving in to see what these Congress people were doing. And I want to know, right? If there were Congress people, I don't care what party they're a part of, if there were people giving other insurrectionists or rioters tours, if they were complicit in any of this, they all got to be rooted out, right? Congress doesn't escape a look down the microscope here. Everybody in that building, and that includes the Republicans. We have another one from Sach, says, I think we are really missing the point here. From my understanding, the contingency plan for the Capitol Police during such an event on January 6th is the deployment of the National Guard. The fact that the deployment of the Guard was delayed potentially deliberately is very bad, but the blame should not be placed on the Capitol Police Chief. In order for them to be ready for such a situation that occurred would mean that they would have to militarize the Capitol Police even further. Yeah, Sach, I'm not particularly concerned here. Yours is continuing to continue that last bit. I think to militarize the Capitol Police even further is scary. They should focus on expediting the process for deploying the National Guard to make sure there is a garrison close enough to respond effectively. Yeah, I'm not trying to beat up on Stephen Sund here. I think Stephen Sund is probably the only person who has been straight with all of us about what actually took place. So he resigned immediately. He has said pretty consistently that one of the reasons that the National Guard request was denied was from optics. That was also confirmed by the Metro DC police chief. I don't have his name in front of me. He basically said that, right? They were talking about optics. Who was talking about optics? Paul Irving, who was the House Sergeant at Arms, who was on record today saying, I don't remember the phone call. So it's about who did what and when, and apparently there was requests for National Guards and they were not delivered. And that is the question. Why not? And why did Mayor Bowser on January 5th send a letter specifically saying, don't send any more federal resources over here. We don't want them. Why did they do that? Hindsight is 20/20. I get it. But these are the same people who've been screaming from the rooftops that Trump is a maniac and that all of his supporters are white supremacist, insurrectionist extremists. So if they thought that and they believed that, then why were they the ones not just saying, well, we're just going to sort of maintain the status quo and just kind of go about our business as usual? No, active requests for no new support, actively writing letters and saying, don't send anyone else. FBI, if you're thinking about it, if you're thinking about the National Guard, we don't want them here. Why? Why is that? Why wouldn't you want them there? If you're Mayor Bowser, you're a Democrat, you think that Trump is a maniac, why are you specifically actively going out there and declining additional resources? Why would that be? I don't know. Maybe somebody will ask them when we have a real hearing. We have Nadarb Lasir says, has anyone been charged in any way connected to white supremacy as in gang charges? You would think there would be an extra charge for being affiliated with a gang while doing that. So I haven't seen anybody, Nadarb. We kind of stopped covering some of the indictments because there's a lot of them. There's so many of them. A lot of people are being prosecuted right now, as they should be. And I have not seen any of those gang terms, but maybe we will. Sach says, if the Capitol Police could have handled the situation, there would be no reason for the National Guard. If the delay was intentional, they need to hold people accountable. Seems the sergeant of the Guard are protecting Pelosi. Yeah, I agree. I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's Pelosi. I don't care if it's Mitch McConnell. I don't care if it's a sergeant at arms for either house. If there was a stand down order, or if there was, hey, Steven Sun says, I called you at 109 and Paul Irving dithered until 209. Well, why is that? You are directly responsible for security. Why didn't that come in? Good question. Another one from Sharon Quidney says, all of this, quote, white supremacy talk is very scary. It's just like that Coca-Cola business forcing people to confess to evil whiteness. This is totally scary. It's blatant racism, and it has to be called out. And you are doing that, Sharon. Thanks for calling it out. Yeah, I saw a good meme. Coca-Cola is now Woca-Cola. Isn't that funny? I had a good laugh at that. We have, which is not actually that funny. We have Rebelling My Way says, did they need an FBI report? Didn't most people know something was going to happen that day? Yes, they did. They all knew. They all knew it. All of the intelligence communities knew it. Everybody knew it was going to go on, but they were more concerned about optics. They were more concerned about, I don't know what. Mayor Bowser said, we went through the letter on January 5th. We don't want any more help. Why not? I don't know. Somebody should ask her. Somebody should bring her up there and ask her. Yeah, everybody knew something was going to happen. Everybody knew it was going to be a big deal. Nobody thought it was going to be what it turned out to be. And most of us, we're not responsible for the security on Capitol Hill. We're not responsible for Washington, D.C. and protecting the entire city and our base of our federal government. That's for other people. That's their entire job. We give them billions and billions and billions of dollars to do that. And they all failed. Why? Ma says, the Proud Boys were the first people to arrive at the Capitol. They were watching the Trump speech while waiting to approach the Capitol. They actually did this on camera, and many of the large names of the groups were there. There is a good documentary on what happened at the beginning elsewhere if you want it at a later time. Well, thank you, Ma, for that. I'm very curious to see how all this all plays out. Let's say, 6 months from now. What is the history of this thing? How does that look? Thank you, Ma. We have Robert says, I tend to agree with Senator Johnson. I've spoken with several people who were there, and they said everyone around them was typical MAGA supporters. There were children and elderly. Also, the fact that two networks played John Sullivan $35,000 each leads to a lot of questions. Yeah, we covered that story too, right? CNN was paying this John Sullivan character who is former BLM, former Antifa. Nobody wants him as part of the group anymore. Once you're caught, everybody disavows you. And so that's what happened with John Sullivan. But why did he make $70,000 for his footage? Very good question. Want to know says, Rob, when this goes to trial, how do you pick a jury that is truly fair, that doesn't have some kind of option? Can you believe, ask them, you watch Fox or CNN, ABC, all totally different views. So I think you're asking is, can you ask them those questions? And yeah, you can actually. This is going to depend a lot on what the judge wants to do. So the judge has, at least here in Arizona, a lot of discretion about what's called voir dire, which is the process before a jury trial where you get to ask the juror questions. Some judges, the way they like to do it is they will ask people to sort of, raise their hands or identify themselves. So let's say you're in a DUI case, a judge might say to the entire jury panel, 40 people, they'll say, has anybody here been impacted adversely by a DUI? Right? Somebody raises up and they, yes, ma'am. What's your name? Oh, I'm Barbara. I got hit by a drunk driver in 1987 and I'm scared of driving on the road. And so she brings up why she's not a good fit to be a juror. And the defense attorney goes, Barbara, we got to get rid of her because she got hit by a drunk driver. She's not going to support our client. In this case, she's going to prejudge him guilty. And so, you sort of identify jurors that way. Then you can, clear people out. I've got a conflict. I've got this. And then you can go into a deeper line of questioning. So you can, as soon as some of the obvious people are sort of stricken from the pool, then you can dive in and call jurors in individually. So you'll call them in and you'll say, hey, I noticed on question 9, when we were talking about, what are your views on law enforcement, that you said X, Y, and Z about police. That sounds like, you may not like the cops. And so the prosecutor's over there scribbling names down because they want to eject that person. And that's when you can sort of dive in. You can say, well, what happened? So tell me about why you have this bad interaction with the police. Okay. And on this story, what did you hear? Oh, okay. So you watch Fox News and then what you're trying to do, depending on what side of the aisle you're on, if you're a prosecutor and you want to keep them, you're going to try to rehabilitate that person. Oh, okay. So you were hit in 1987 by a drunk driver, but that was a long time ago, right? Yes. And do you have any lingering animosity about that? Do you have any lingering animosity? And she goes, no, I don't. It's, no, you're right. No, I can be fair. Oh, so you can be fair and impartial here? Perfect. So the prosecutor's going to want to keep them. Meanwhile, at the defense over here, we're throwing our hands up in the air. Judge, she's been impacted by it. She's not going to be fair and impartial. And so you can just really battle it out over that stuff. But you're going to get a lot of people who come in, they want to be a part of a jury. They're excited about it. Yay, I get to sit on a jury. I get to judge people. This is fun. And they come in with a preconceived notion. Most of the time, they think your client's already guilty before any evidence has been presented. And the judges will ask them questions about that also. The judge will say, how many people here think that this person that you see sitting over here is guilty? Okay, before the trial even starts, before opening arguments even start, we're doing voir dire. We're asking the jurors questions to see whether they can be on the panel or not. And so the judge will say, does anybody think this guy's guilty? And you'll have half the jury panel goes, yeah, I do. Well, he got charged. And well, sir, why do you think? Well, he got charged with a crime, and he is obviously the cops are here, and he looks guilty to me. And so all of those people are now being written down. Okay, those are all going to be objections. We're going to try to strike those jurors probably. The next question is, how many people here think that they can't tell whether he's guilty or not? So question one, is he guilty? Half the room. Okay, so for those of you who didn't raise your hand, how many people think that at this moment in time, before the trial has even started, that you don't know? You can't decide right now whether he's guilty or innocent. And you get another, I don't know, half of the remainders that say, yeah, I don't know. I just don't know whether he's guilty or not. We haven't heard any evidence. I think this is the right answer. So I'm going to raise my hand because we don't know. No evidence has been presented yet. The trial hasn't even started. And the judge goes, okay, so that's also wrong because we have the presumption of innocence in this country. Technically, right now, this man sitting here is innocent. All of you who raised your hand in those last two questions, you're all wrong. The people who didn't raise their hand and said, no, he's innocent at this moment, which is usually like two people, they all, they're actually right. The presumption of innocence applies and it starts right there. And so you can see how this voir dire process can go on for a long time and it can be very complicated. I went way too long discussing that, but it's a fun topic to get into. We've got Ma Fox who says, it's because this investigation is to stop this from happening in the future. It's about fixing procedure, not pointing fingers. Well, Ma, you are a very reasonable person. That's one part of why I'm interested in it. The other point is to point the fingers. Who the hell's responsible for this? I think part of fixing the procedure is making sure that the people who are responsible for a botched procedure or people who might have some malfeasance in it, they may have just been delaying it. This may have been good for them. There may be some alternative motives here. Those people need to be identified. And the only way we can do that is by pointing our fingers right at them and saying, you botched this. You're not allowed back in our security infrastructure anymore. Thanks for playing the game. You botched it. You're out now. So I am interested in that. You're much more diplomatic than I am, though, Ma. We have Taki Sajahar. We got Seji back in the house. He says, just tuned in like 40 minutes in. Robert, I would argue that those that the House contacted are not big tech, but rather big comms. That's probably fair. Big Com has to focus on markets between intra-America and inter-America. I think that is the proper use of those prefixes. The internet is not necessarily an intranet, I believe. Big Com seems to be more big capitalist than Big Com-E. So it's good to see you, Seji. We have not seen you in a while. I'm glad that you're back. We have Josh Sesko says, hey, Robert, have you seen the clip of Biden fumbling the words and letting that N-word slip out? I actually have seen that. He was trying to, I don't think it's actually that word. I think it's just sort of a combination of two words that kind of sounds like that word. And so, I watched it and it's not good. It's not good. Biden is just mumbling all over the place. And he just remember that he was going to bring true international little pressure on the whole world. I think he was trying to say true international diplomatic pressure on the Iranians, but he said true little pressure, and he just consolidated all those words into one word. I think he was doing the same thing, and a very bad word came out of his mouth. So not too good there for Joe Biden. All right. So we're going to wrap up that segment. That was a long one. Oh my gosh, we have so much more to get to. I spent way too much time on that, but there's some good stuff there, and it gets me hot. Speaking of that, let's change gears and let's talk about, did Faith? Okay, yeah, all right. So here we are. Let's change gears. All right, the next story. There is new evidence that the Democrats are going to be continuing with their campaign against big media, against this misinformation. We've heard this a lot over these last months. A lot of dangerous misinformation is being spread around. That's why you got to have the little context boxes about COVID, a little context box about election, a little context box about everything, because everything is so dangerous. And there's a very interesting argument that is now coming out of the Democratic House. They're sending letters out, and they're holding a hearing tomorrow called Fanning the Flames. So in anticipation for the hearing tomorrow, they are going to be, they sent letters out to, who do we have? Comcast, AT&T, Spectrum, Dish, Verizon, Cox, all of these communication companies, and basically saying, you people are responsible for spreading dangerous misinformation. What are you going to do about it? This story came over from the New York Times. 3 months ago, federal lawmakers grilled, whatever, if you can call it that, Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook's chief executive, and Jack Dorsey, Twitter's chief, about misinformation that had appeared on their platforms. Would you call it a grilling? I sort of call it like a game of patty cake over there. Now, a congressional committee has scheduled a hearing to focus on the role of companies that provide cable television service in the spread of falsehoods concerning the 2020 election. In advance of the hearing, which takes place tomorrow, it's called Fanning the Flames, Disinformation and Extremism in the Media. Members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee sent a letter on Monday to Comcast, AT&T, Spectrum, Dish, Verizon, Cox, Altice, asking about their role in, quote, the spread of dangerous information. The committee also sent a letter to Roku, Amazon, Apple, Google, Hulu, digital companies that distribute the cable programming. The scrutiny of the providers took on new urgency after supporters of the former president, Donald J. Trump, repeatedly and promoted the debunked claim that the election was rigged, stormed the Capitol. So you see that? That's a beautiful sentence right there. New urgency, cable providers, because they were spreading the misinformation that was being consumed by the supporters of the president, who repeatedly promoted the debunked claim that the election was rigged, and they therefore stormed the Capitol, ipso de facto, connect all the way back to the chain. The TV companies now are responsible for spreading the information, and the chain of causation goes all the way back to them. They're fanning the flames of disinformation. Therefore, technically, I think that they're responsible for the insurrection. Newsmax, a right-wing cable channel carried by AT&T, CenturyLink, Charter, Comcast, Dish, and Verizon, had a surge in ratings in November because of the programs that embraced Mr. Trump's claims. One America News Network, same story there. They also promoted, according to the New York Times, a false theory. Fox News, the most watched cable news network, which is available from all major carriers, was one of 5 defendants in a $2.7 billion defamation suit by Smartmatic. In the suit, the company accused Fox and others of promoting false claims about the election, and Fox has denied the claims and filed a motion to dismiss the suit. I need to take a look at that one. Congress can raise the issue of whether cable providers bear responsibility for the program. So why is Congress even getting involved in this? This is where it comes from. They have the ability to decide whether programs they deliver to million Americans, they can sort of regulate them, but it may have no way to force them to drop networks that have spread misinformation. And unlike broadcast stations, cable channels do not have licenses that are regulated by the FCC. Brendan Carr, a Republican FCC commissioner, blasted the letter from the House Democrats in a statement on Monday, calling it a, quote, a chilling transgression of the free speech rights that every media outlet in this country enjoys. And we're going to go right through the letter. And what you're going to see here, it's basically a form letter. And I want to go through it because it is interesting. And what they did here is they sent the same letter to all of those different companies that we just listed out. So when you look up the document on the House website, you will see it's a very big, long document, but it's basically the same letter over and over and over. They just switched it from AT&T to Verizon to Comcast to Google to Apple to Hulu. Same basic letter, same similar questions, but just addressed to everybody. So it looks like it's a huge document, but it's really not. It's just a couple slides. So let's get into it. This is the letter that was being sent over to AT&T. They're sending it to the CEO, drafted yesterday to Mr. John Stankey, the CEO of AT&T. Dear Mr. Stankey, our country's public discourse is plagued by misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories, and lies. These phenomena undergird the radicalization of seditious individuals who committed acts of insurrection on January 6th. Look at that word salad. Can you believe this? This is impressive. Look at this. Misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories, lies, phenomena, radicalization, seditious, insurrection. It all contributes to a growing distrust of public health measures necessary to crush the pandemic. Bravo. Now they're saying we got to do this to save lives as a result of the pandemic. We are concerned about the role AT&T plays in disseminating misinformation to millions of its Uverse, DirecTV, AT&T TV subscribers. We write to you today to request additional information about what actions AT&T is taking to address these issues. So it's sort of talking past the sale, thinking past the sale. They're laying out a premise and they're asking AT&T, well, this is what we think is true, and what are you doing to address what we have just defined for you? And we're expecting information. We want additional information about what you're going to do here. But AT&T, as far as we know, has not ever agreed to that premise. Do they agree that we are plagued by misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories? Is this a plague? All right. Going back, it says nearly half of Americans get their news primarily from TV. However, not all TV news sources are the same. Some outlets have long been misinformation rumor mills and conspiracy theory hotbeds that produce content that leads to real harm. Misinformation on TV has led to our current polluted information environment that radicalizes individuals to commit seditious acts and rejects public health best practices, among other issues. So basically, we have one good paragraph, and then this is sort of a copy and paste of that paragraph. Experts have noted that the right-wing media ecosystem is, quote, much more susceptible to disinformation, lies, and half-truths. Right-wing media outlets like Newsmax, OANN, Fox News all aired misinformation about 2020, incendiary reports. We have angry and dangerous subculture. We have a violent mob breaching the doors of the Capitol building. We have sort of romantic idea, according to somebody on Newsmax. Fox News has spent years spewing misinformation about American politics. The same networks also have been key vectors of spreading disinformation about COVID-19. All right, whole COVID-19 thing, Chinese Communist Party, got it. Sadly, these facts are not new. One popular television show aired a segment on OAN last April that included a dire warning. The kind of misinformation OAN is spewing right now could end up getting people killed. All right. Yet to our knowledge, the cable, satellite, and over-the-top companies that disseminate these media outlets have done nothing in response to the misinformation aired. AT&T carries Fox News, so they want Fox News gone, they want Newsmax gone, they want OAN gone. They say the company serves 17 million Americans, and then this is the questions that they're asking that they want answers to. Number one, they're asking this of AT&T, Google, Comcast, all of them. What moral or ethical principles, including those related to journalistic integrity, violence, medical information, and public health, do you apply in deciding which channels to carry and when to take adverse actions against a channel? This is the government going into a company and telling them, asking them, tell us how you do all of your business in there. All right. Do you require through contracts or otherwise that the channels you carry abide by any content guidelines? Well, they could look at the terms of service. They could go to the community content guidelines here on YouTube. I've spent a lot of time reading through those. Number three, how many of your subscribers tuned into Fox News, Newsmax for each of the 4 weeks preceding? So they want the data. Specify the number of subscribers that tuned into each channel. I hope their lawyers just tell them to shove this letter right up. Number four, what steps did you take prior to, on, and following that November 3rd, 2020 election attacks to monitor, respond to, and reduce the spread of disinformation on your channel? Please describe each step you took. Number five, have you taken any adverse actions against the channel, including Fox News, Newsmax, or OAN, for using your platform to disseminate disinformation about the Capitol Hill riots, about November elections, about COVID-19? Number seven, have you ever taken any actions against the channel for using your platform to disseminate any disinformation? And are you planning to continue carrying Fox News, Newsmax, OAN, Uverse, and so on? Signed off. Let's make sure these people are immortalized here. We have Anna G. Eshoo, member of Congress, and we got Jeremy McNierney, another member of Congress. I think they're both from California. So if they don't like what you're saying or what you're doing, they want you removed from the communication medium. Not only should you be deplatformed, canceled, removed from the internet, but anybody who's even carrying your show now. So Fox News is the company that produces the content. AT&T here would be transferring that content over the airwaves, over the internet. They don't want that to happen. So this would be like, I don't know, maybe they should just shut off the electricity to OAN, and maybe they should shut off the electricity to Fox News too. Maybe they should shut off their water and their garbage collection. Maybe they shouldn't have property because they can use that property to record videos to disseminate information. They would use the water to hydrate themselves. They would use the electricity to turn the cameras on. And all that has to be stopped because dangerous misinformation is so bad that it just, we got to do it. We got to root this sucker out. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about the hearing tomorrow. There's very interesting legal framework here that I think is worth covering. So tomorrow they sent that letter out today, and was it today? Yeah, let's take a quick look. So that went out today, and they're asking for responses on a number of different things that came out yesterday. So they sent a letter yesterday, and then tomorrow they've got a hearing, Wednesday, the 24th. So they gave them 2 days to respond to answers, and the hearing is on fanning the flames, disinformation, and extremism in the media. On Wednesday, they're going to be holding this. The hearing will examine the role of traditional media platforms, broadcasters, and cable networks in disseminating disinformation and extremist content to the American public. So they know that they already have the big tech companies. We've already seen that. Twitter just put the total axe on Donald Trump. They've just purged a lot of different people on there. YouTube is following suit, as we are seeing. We are also seeing Facebook also, very becoming very strict about what can be posted and whatnot. And so they know that they've got that in the bag. So the next battleground is traditional media, radio. We've seen podcasts come under fire because this is very difficult to sort of monitor. Now they're also coming out against Clubhouse. They don't want Clubhouse to succeed because it's unfettered conversations. I think you can Google that. I think there's a New York Times article, unfettered Clubhouse conversations. It's unfettered. It's not monitored. You don't have moderators in there fact checking everything that's being said on your platform. Well, what if somebody says something that's wrong? There could be disinformation. We could, have people die over this stuff. So we got to censor everything and shut it all down, because the media wants to bring everything back within their vertical. They want control of it. They want you to go to the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, and MSNBC, and Facebook, and Twitter, and Google. And that's it. If you want to be an independent blogger, if you want to hop on a Clubhouse and have an unfettered conversation, that's all scary language. It's dangerous. And they actually go in here and make a legal case for why this is so dangerous. And I've never seen anything just so insane to me in my life. We hear, that's not true. I've seen a lot of insane things in my life. This is scratching the surface, but it is concerning nonetheless. Background: free speech scholars argue that for a democracy to function, informed debates and the marketplace of ideas must be able to work off of a shared set of facts. Is that true? Do you think that's true? That a democracy will not function if we're not operating from the same set of facts? I mean, isn't that what we argue about all the time? About facts and about what to do about those facts and who has more facts and which facts are accurate and which facts matter and which facts don't matter? Many experts agree that dangerous disinformation about the coronavirus in the 2020 election has greatly intensified an already deadly public health crisis. So even this is coming into COVID now. The scope of COVID is going into political conversation, political dialogues, further divided the nation and fomented an insurrection. While much of the blame has been placed on the widespread disinformation on social media platforms, industry participants have also noted that broadcast and cable outlets have played a role in the spread of the disinformation. Yeah, they've got social media platforms buttoned up. But in order for a democracy to function, informed debates and the marketplace of ideas must be able to work off a shared set of facts. Disinformation on cable and broadcast networks. According to Pew, more than 10,000 individuals, over 50% of Americans get their news primarily from television or the radio. And some go as far as to argue that this type of media is the primary driver of disinformation. So they're going to come after them hard. The media's role for nearly a year, disinformation regarding the seriousness of COVID-19 has caused damage to this country. Then after the Capitol Hill riots, that one radio group which airs programming from many popular talk radio hosts who regularly spread disinformation distributed a memo telling on-air personalities to stop claiming the election was stolen. On facing legal action, some cable media networks have aired segments retracting things. All right, so it's all seeming to be working there. We have incentives and motivations behind it. We've got political economists have argued that the dissemination of disinformation on these is a result of several different factors. First, media outlets are focusing on increasing revenue and audience share. So they rely on controversy and division that is presumed to be popular. Additionally, local newsrooms have been forced to downsize or shut down completely. Some local outlets have been unable to cover vital health and political stories in their community. They're saying this is now leading to a vacuum that is being filled by partisan commentary and disinformation. Traditional media outlets will often cover demonstrably false statements. Media outlets also provide a forum. This whole thing is just a joke. I mean, if they want to come down on anybody for misinformation, then I think the same standard should apply to politicians across the board. Okay, basically everything that comes out of a politician's mouth is some form of disinformation, right? I mean, unless they come and make a speech that's cited by, facts that have been fact-checked and cross-referenced and peer-reviewed, then, in any political debate, when somebody says, well, Joe, you're responsible for the 1994 crime bill, and that led to many people being incarcerated in this country. Well, that sounds pretty accurate to me, but Joe doesn't like that. So Joe might say, well, that's disinformation. I don't think that's true at all. And he could probably make an argument to support that claim. I think it would be a very bad argument personally, but he could make an argument. And that's the point. Is people have different opinions. They have different facts. They want to have conversations about it. If you're operating off the same set of facts, what do you even need to talk about? What is there to talk about? If there's a standard definition here, okay, well, that thing is broken. Yeah, I agree with you. Okay, so we can fix that thing. Yeah, I agree. And the data says that if we do this solution, the facts will return this to us and this will be the outcome. I agree with that. Because we're operating off the same set of facts. That's the whole point of free speech. Is the whole point of democracy is we disagree on the facts. We disagree on the repercussions. We disagree on what's real and what's not. And we have conversations about it in order to synthesize what the final conclusion is or what it should be. And we use reason and logic to do that. We don't just pull people off of the air. And they're making an argument here that this is actually better for democracy, which is just astounding to me. I mean, these issues are just mind-boggling to me that they just can't recognize it. It's the First Amendment for a reason. It's the First Amendment because it is foundational. Everything else stems from the ability to speak freely. That includes disinformation. That includes misinformation. You're allowed to be wrong. You're allowed to interpret things one way and go out there and communicate those to other people. You're allowed to lie in this country. It's not illegal to do that. It's wrong. I don't endorse it, but it's not illegal. Now they're making sort of a private, argument. Well, you as a responsible company should do this. And it seems to be very dangerous to me. Very dangerous. Let's go to the questions. We have Sharon Quidney says, okay, so now we really are in totalitarian country. So now it is forbidden to question the outcome of the predetermined election and the party line narrative. This has crossed way over the line. This has to be stopped. We'll see what that hearing comes up with tomorrow. It's very frustrating. When management fails to put in adequate controls and protections, they contribute to the crime, even if they are not legally accountable, says No Doubt. While the person that breaks the law goes to jail, the additional appropriate action is to fire management. Elections. Thank you, No Doubt. Got a good point on that one. Another one from Sharon says, they already control the press, the mainstream media. What they are trying to do is silence anyone who doesn't toe the party line. Yeah, they're going literally directly after their oppositional media. That's it. Did they send a letter over to MSNBC? I didn't see that. Did they reference MSNBC in there? I didn't see that. Is everything that comes out of Rachel Maddow's mouth, is that all fact? I don't think so. Next up, we got Just XUXA says, where are the Republicans calling this madness out? Well, they are totally ineffective. I don't know what they're doing. The Republicans, I think that party is right in the toilet. I mean that sincerely. There has been no leadership out of anybody there, and they're not doing anything about any of this free speech stuff. I just have not heard of any of it. Not from Holly, not from Cruz, not from anybody. Sharon says, this is outrageous. It's a direct assault on the First Amendment, civil liberties. Are these companies going to have the guts to stand up to these lunatic, totalitarian dictators? Probably not. Probably not. I mean, if history is instructive, probably not. We'll see. Remark number 2 says, it seems like the leftist media spread a lot of disinformation and didn't report anything negative about Biden, leading to the wrong candidates being elected. Yeah. So what if it's sort of misinformation by, what's the word? Lying by omission. Lying by omission. What if it's misinformation by omission? They just didn't cover it. Okay. None of the Hunter Biden stuff. Just gone. Why not? Is that misinformation? So now we have to have conversations about everything that's being reported. Somebody's, nope, that's information. You can't talk about that. That's disinformation. That's dangerous. You're not allowed to talk about that. On every single conversation, on every single broadcast, we have to be just so afraid of what we say because we're going to get canceled or deplatformed, or we're going to have the airwaves cut off from us, the electricity cut off from us. It's insane. All right. So that's the last question on that segment. Let's change gears. Let's get away from some of the Washington, D.C. stuff. Kind of. Not really, because this all also happened in Washington, D.C. Very recently, we learned that the United States arrested the wife of the infamous drug cartel mastermind El Chapo. El Chapo's wife was arrested very recently. This story came over from the New York Times, and it says here, her name is Coronel Aispuro. The wife of Mexico's most notorious drug dealer trafficker known as El Chapo was arrested on Monday, charged with helping her husband run his multi-billion-dollar criminal empire, plotting to break him out of prison after he was captured in 2014. So we have a copy of the whole arrest warrant, the complaint, the affidavit, all of it. And it's pretty interesting. So we're going to go through it. Let's just do a little bit more of the light lifting on the background here. Miss Coronel, a former beauty queen, there she is right there, had been under investigation for at least 2 years by U.S. authorities for being an accomplice to her husband, Joaquin Guzman Loera, who was convicted in 2019 at a trial in Brooklyn for masterminding a huge drug conspiracy, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Court documents filed in Ms. Coronel's case said she had relayed messages for Guzman that helped him make drug shipments from 2012 to 2014 and evade capture by the legions of Americans and Mexican authorities that had been pursuing him for years. So at his trial, evidence emerged that Ms. Coronel was a chief conspirator and a sophisticated plot to break him out of the Altiplano prison by digging a nearly mile-long tunnel into the shower of his cell. And we have some sort of details on how this all unfolded in the complaint. It's pretty interesting. She is 31 years old. She's a dual U.S.-Mexican citizen. She's got roots in Southern California, city of Culiacan, Mexico, in Sinaloa State. And so they were part of the Sinaloa drug cartel. This was the long-serving base of operations for them. Taken into custody at Dulles International Airport near Washington, scheduled to make an initial appearance today on Tuesday in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. Her lawyer, Jeffrey Lichtman, who also represented Mr. Guzman, declined to comment. It's unusual for law enforcement officials to go after the spouses, but she's unlike the other wives of the narco trafficker. She was deeply enmeshed in her husband's criminal business. They introduced BlackBerry messages that made clear she had helped El Chapo conduct his operations, sometimes with her own father. She was intimately involved not only in the 2015 tunnel escape, but also in helping him to evade capture after a botched raid in 2012 in the Mexican resort town of Cabo San Lucas. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. I love Mexico. All right, so this is what the Department of Justice says. The wife of El Chapo, arrested on international drug charges. He was the leader of a drug trafficking organization known as the Sinaloa Cartel. She was arrested today in Virginia on charges related to her alleged involvement in the drug trafficking. 31, dual citizen, on and on and on. We already basically covered that in the news article. So here it is. This is the complaint with an arrest warrant. This was filed on February 17th in Judge Harvey Michael's court, United States of America versus Emma Coronel Aispuro. This is an affidavit of Special Agent from the FBI, Eric McGuire, in support of an application for a criminal complaint and arrest warrant. He says, I've been a special agent with the FBI since February 2010. been a lead agent for investigations targeting global criminal organization. I've testified in a wide array, got a lot of training, a lot of confidential sources, interviewed hundreds of defendants. I have direct knowledge of international contraband, smuggling, and money laundering. That was paragraph 1, so we're going to skip over to paragraph 3. This affidavit is submitted for the limited purpose of establishing probable cause. So what are they trying to say here? What are they going to charge her with? And remember sort of where we're at in the context of this. So this is the very early part of the case. And right now, all they're trying to do is say we have enough material, we have enough evidence, we have enough probable cause in order to hold her in custody and bring her in front of a judge. And basically an arrest warrant, they picked her up, they brought her in front of a judge today. We don't know what the final outcome is, but it's the very early part of the case. So this is not all of the evidence, is my point. This is not exhaustive. There's going to be a lot more evidence that comes out further down the line, but this is just enough to sort of get her in custody and get her in front of a judge into the next step. So her attorney then can file can basically challenge all of the probable cause that they're alleging here. But right now, this is enough to keep her in and get her to a judge. So we're not going to go through this in too much detail, but here's what they're claiming at this point. There's a criminal complaint. They're saying this supports a criminal complaint charging her with conspiring to knowingly and intentionally distribute 1 kilogram of a mixture containing a detectable amount of heroin. So heroin, we got 5 kilos of cocaine. We've got 1,000 kilos of marijuana. We've got 500 grams of methamphetamine. And we've also got knowingly bringing this stuff into the United States. Knowing and intending that they're unlawfully imported into the United States. So, a decent amount of drugs there, but I'm sure there is a lot more where that came from. We're going to skip down to paragraph 7. It says the drug trafficking activities of the Sinaloa cartel, the FBI and the criminal division of the division's narcotic and dangerous drug section have investigated high-ranking members of the international drug trafficking organization known as the Sinaloa cartel, including but not limited to all of these people. So we got Joaquin Guzman Loera, known as El Chapo, but we also have Licenciado. We also have Menor. We also have Tocaya. We also have Raton. We also have Guerrero. See how bad my Spanish is. Now, paragraph 8, as a part of this investigation, I have debriefed more than 100 members, former members, and associates of the Sinaloa cartel, including but not limited to high-ranking associate of Guzman, herein referred to as cooperating witness number 1. I've debriefed debriefed personally on dozens of occasions about the drug trafficking and other activities of the cartel. I've reviewed thousands of intercepted wires and electronic communications relating to the drug trafficking activities. So, cooperating witness number 1. Big reveal here, right? This is the cooperating witness. This is somebody who is spilling the goods on all of the Sinaloa drug cartel insiders. So this person is, he's kind of playing a dangerous game here, but the FBI is going to be protecting him. So that's good stuff. We've got on June 1st, the Office of the Foreign Asset Control designated Guzman as a significant foreign narcotics trafficker. Designated his son, designated all of these other people in that same category. Paragraph 10, I know from my investigation that Guzman and Sabata were the co-leaders of the Sinaloa cartel from 1989 to 2016. They formed the most prolific drug trafficking partnership in the world. They controlled drug trafficking routes from South America to the United States, importing tons of cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and marijuana. They created an umbrella of security and corruption that permitted other drug traffickers to operate through Mexico. And here's what happened here with cooperating witness number 1. They pled guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to distribute 5 kilos or more of cocaine. And he or she agreed to cooperate with the government in exchange for a potential reduction in sentence. See how they do that? Happens all the time. If you've got multiple people that you're going to charge with an offense, prosecutors can just pick the really big one that they want, and they can go around the room and say, all right, look, under the law, we can give you 2 million years in prison. If you want, 1 year or 2 years, you got to give us some good stuff. And then they'll do these things called free talks, where they'll just sit down and talk. And so this FBI agent, when he said, I've interviewed this person dozens of times, we've had a lot of conversations about this, they're doing free talks. That individual, he or she, they're just talking. So their attorney worked out a deal where they said, my friend, you got to tell him everything. Sit down, So a defense attorney would normally say, you don't talk to them at all. Here they're saying, go wild, right? Because they've already negotiated the deal. What the attorney probably did is they said, hey, what do you know, right? What do you know about this stuff? And this cooperating witness came back down and said, a lot. I know all of this stuff. Came it out. And that the defense attorney said, all right, here's what we can do if you want to go down this road. All right, now this person is, high up on the Sinaloa drug cartel or whatever the remnants are of that organization. They are probably a little bit concerned about their well-being and their safety because of this information that is being provided. So that's how that works, and it's going to work out well for that person. They're not going to get a ton of time in prison, but there's an exchange there. It goes on. It says, paragraph 17, according to cooperating witness number 1, Coronel knew that Guzman was a leader of the Sinaloa cartel. So this is the wife. She knew that her husband, of course, was the kingpin and that he coordinated in the distribution of all this stuff. And also, according to cooperating witness number 1, she also knew that all of Guzman's sons, here we've got Ivan, Ovidio, Alfredo, Joaquin, were also high-ranking members. So Coronel knew that the husband was involved, and she knew that the sons were involved. Very well aware of this. We also knew that she grew up with knowledge of the narcotics trafficking industry. She met Guzman, the El Chapo, when she was a teenager. Based on my investigation, I understood the scope of the Sinaloa's cartel's drug trafficking. Coronel knows and understands that the Sinaloa cartel is the most prolific cartel in Mexico. She was aware of multi-ton cocaine shipments, multi-kilo heroin production, multi-ton marijuana shipments, and ton quantity of methamphetamine shipments. It's like straight out of Breaking Bad. Coronel understood the drug proceeds she controlled during her marriage were derived from these shipments. She also knew that and relayed messages on behalf of Guzman in furtherance of the drug trafficking activities. She also helped El Chapo avoid any capture by the Mexican authorities. Once he was arrested in February 2014, she continued to deliver messages that she received from Guzman during her prison visits, which were not monitored by the Mexican authorities. And we have some letters that are actually in this document. Let's get into them. I have reviewed a handwritten letter that was signed by El Chapo. This letter was authenticated by multiple witnesses, and we're going to see here how they're talking in code. And so this cooperating witness number 1 is also corroborating this letter. So presumably this person knows him well enough to know what his handwriting looks like. Handwritten letter signed, multiple witnesses confirm it, including cooperating witness number 1. The FBI has it in control. Here's what the letter says. Regarding Cleto, increase the production so that it yields. Talking in code. Regarding Cleto, increase the production so that it yields. Say hi to Cleto. Tell him to please give me a hand so that the first sale will be my part. ... But, because I have a lot of expenses here. All right, so the FBI special agent says, I know from my investigation that Cleto is a drug trafficker based in Durango. He produces heroin. I know from cooperating witness 1, as well as others, that he produced heroin specifically for El Chapo. Guzman's reference to expenses here was a reminder to the recipient of the letter that Guzman had to pay bribes inside the prison and also continue to support his family. I know from my investigation that Cleto and cooperating witness 1 provided Coronel with drug proceeds for more than 5 kilograms of heroin. We have another letter. Coronel's participation in Guzman's escape from prison. So if you don't remember this one, this was a wild story. I mean, El Chapo is the biggest drug dealer ever, and he was incarcerated and in a Mexican jail, and then he escaped. Nobody knew what the hell happened. Turns out they dug a tunnel literally a mile long under the prison up into his shower, and the guy escaped right under the noses of the Mexican authorities. And so it's looking like Coronel helped him do that. And so did his 4 sons. So this whole thing is a family affair. Let's dive into this letter. Based on my knowledge and the investigation of debriefing of multiple former cartel members, Coronel visited Guzman at the Altiplano prison on multiple occasions following his arrest in 2014. I have reviewed a handwritten letter written and signed by El Chapo. This letter was authenticated by multiple witnesses, also in evidence. The letter contains detailed instructions about the ongoing operations of the cartel, including narcotics transports. The letter also states in pertinent part, I ask you always to be in agreement among you and my 4 sons. Hire accountants throughout the state and pay the guys and widows from there. And whatever is left per month, half is for you and half is for the 4 of them. You know who has the papers from that place. Send them to the twins, please. The twins' mother will tell you and my children something. Please be alert, compadre. She will explain. The twins' mother will bring a message to all of you so that you all see it personally. Right? Different code letter. Based on my knowledge of the investigation, I understand my 4 sons to be Ivan, Alfredo, Ovidio, and Joaquin, and I understand the twins' mother to be Coronel. Based on the letter quoted above and my knowledge of the investigation, I believe that Coronel was acting as a go-between and messenger between Guzman and his lieutenants, associates, and sons. I further understand that Guzman, El Chapo, continued to direct the drug trafficking activities of the Sinaloa cartel from the prison, including with the help of Coronel. Then we get, this is where we get the explanation. We have like 2 more slides on this and then we're done. Here it says, according to the cooperating witness, Guzman, through Coronel, asked Guzman's sons to purchase a piece of land near the Altiplano prison and instructed cooperating witness 1, so somebody close to them, to purchase a warehouse near Altiplano prison as well as firearms and an armored truck. So El Chapo's in prison right now, and they're buying up land around it. They're buying up firearms and an armored truck. Those present also discussed the need to get a GPS watch to Guzman in prison in order to pinpoint his exact whereabouts so as to construct the tunnel with an entry point accessible to him. According to CW1, he later met with Coronel to discuss the Altiplano prison escape plan. They provided updates to Coronel to pass on to Guzman. So he was literally planning his escape through his wife, also through his sons. According to cooperating witness 1, he or she met again with Guzman's sons to discuss the escape plan. The sons reported to Guzman he could hear the tunnel construction. Guzman's sons reported that Guzman could hear the tunnel construction and that the escape would be on a Saturday or Sunday because there are no officials or visitors at the jail on those days. According to Mexican authorities, on July 11, 2015, Guzman escaped from the Altiplano prison via an underground tunnel with an entry under the shower of Guzman's cell. It's like, why is this not a Hollywood movie? I do not know. Conclusion, based on the foregoing facts, I respectfully submit that there is probable cause to believe that from at least in or about 2014 and at least on or about January 19th, 2017, Coronel, the wife, knowingly, intentionally, willfully conspired with Guzman to distribute all of those drugs. We already talked about them. Heroin, 5 kilos of cocaine, 1,000 kilos of marijuana, 500 grams of meth, and knowingly importing those things into the country, signed off on by Eric S. McGuire, special agent of the FBI, digitally signed and approved on by this judge, Honorable G. Michael Harvey, out of the D.C. Federal District. So, interesting case. Wanted to just run through that. I think it's one that might be interesting to follow along. So we'll see what that looks like. I think that the evidence here is probably overwhelming. You know, these 2 people have been on the run for years, and you know, it's a good thing that they're not importing all of those drugs into this country because drugs are bad. All right, let's jump into the question. We have Rob. Is it really wrong for his wife to do that? I think not, and surprised you're talking about it. I know some bikers, if you want to talk about them too, just kidding. Also, would you defend a high-profile case like this? Yeah, so, he's surprised that I'm talking about it. Maybe because the Sinaloa, listen, I'm not trying to offend the Sinaloa drug cartel, all right? We're defense lawyers, okay? We help your side, not the other side. So don't get mad at me for talking about it. But yeah, I would absolutely handle a high profile case like this. I think everybody deserves a defense. Everybody. If the government has its ducks in a row, if they have the case in order, there's very little that a defense attorney can do, right? I mean, truly, if everything is fine with the government's case, then there's very little that a defense attorney can do. The issue here, which is why we have a job and a thriving business, is because the government's case is not always in order. Mostly it's not. They screw up a lot, and because they get sloppy, because they think that it's sort of in the bag, and they don't do things by the book because of a lot of other problems. So, you know, I do think that, you know, I don't endorse smuggling drugs into the United States. Just because I would represent somebody in a high profile case like this does not mean that I endorse what they do, but I do endorse the presumption of innocence. I do endorse the due process concepts that we have here that are, I think, foundational to justice. And in order to make sure that the justice system continues to move forward and that the government continues to be held accountable, I would absolutely represent somebody like this. No question about it. And so a couple good questions there. Thank you for those. Let's change gears, and we got to talk about, some bad news. So we've been covering Daniel Prude for a long time on this channel. I've brought him up multiple times in multiple stories. We covered his case at length. This was the story back in Rochester, New York, which we were sort of revisiting because very recently there was a new case out of Rochester, New York, where a 9-year-old girl was pepper sprayed because she was getting into it with police. I mean, the police literally pepper sprayed a 9-year-old girl who was in handcuffs after being covered in snow while her butt was already in the back of a police car. They didn't like that she was having a mental emergency because she just thought that her mom stabbed her father. The whole thing was bad, and they still pepper sprayed her while she was in handcuffs. Here you go. Rochester Police. We remembered them because we covered the same Rochester Police, not the same officers, but the same department long time ago, last year, in the situation of Daniel Prude. Daniel Prude was another individual who should not have been killed by the police. He was having a mental health emergency. No question about it. This guy was naked. He was high on drugs, probably. I haven't confirmed that. Probably. Or he was having a mental breakdown. Who knows? But he was naked, not a threat to the police. They did not like what he was saying. They thought the whole thing was a joke. It was one of the most horrendous body camera videos that we've gone through here. And we've covered a lot of them. It was really bad because of the amount of inhumanity that we saw from these cops towards a man who was not a threat to them, who was clearly hurting, in pain, confused, just totally out of sorts, and they killed him, in my opinion. They killed him. That's not a question. Whether it's murder or not, we're going to dig into that right now. We saw this earlier today, posted by Meg O'Connor. She's a great follow on Twitter if you're interested in criminal justice. She said, in 5 minutes, the New York Attorney General Letitia James, set to make an announcement regarding the conclusion of the investigation into the Rochester police killing of Daniel Prude. And so you may remember this scene. Really bad scene. We have, I think 6 or 7 cops were all around him, and they put him in a spit sock. Okay, so he started spitting, not necessarily at them. And when we did our frame by frame here on this channel, we followed the spit. It wasn't in the direction of the officers at all. We followed a speck on the camera from the body cameras that he was like spitting gum out a different direction. So they said, oh, he's spitting. So they put a spit sock on him. So it was one of the most, ridiculous things that I've ever seen. And I thought that they clearly murdered this guy, but New York Attorney General Letitia James says no. She said a grand jury today had voted not to indict any police officer on charges relating to the death of Daniel Prude. My office concluded there was sufficient evidence surrounding the death to present a case to the grand jury. We presented the most comprehensive case possible, but the grand jury came back and no dice there. Didn't work out for him. So does this sort of ring a bell for anybody? We did the same thing, had the same process when we were covering Breonna Taylor. Same story. Cops were involved. Somebody was killed. Evidence is presented to the grand jury. Grand jury comes back. Nope, we investigated the cops. Nothing there. No evidence, no charges. Back then, we were saying, well, wait a minute. What evidence did you present? Daniel Cameron, the Attorney General out of on the Breonna Taylor case, said we presented all the evidence. We presented everything. And then grand jurors came out and said, no, you didn't. You didn't tell us that we could charge that officer. You didn't tell us that we had alternative options. You didn't present that. You didn't say that, because Daniel Cameron went out in the media and was, bloviating around on the news and saying, well, we did everything. And they, the grand jury, fair and impartial. And they decided that John Mattingly, our officer, didn't do anything wrong. And they saw that, the grand jurors, and came back out and they said, no, that's not true at all. That's not how it went. So you'll have to excuse my skepticism here that Miss Letitia James really did present all of the evidence that she is claiming. But let's go through some of this. So this is her statement. She says here, and remember, the Attorney General is the chief law enforcement officer of the state, right? They typically, in this case, she is responsible for prosecuting this case, is what it sounds like. So let's go through what her statement is. Before I do, remember this. Remember how he died? If you're not familiar with this case, he was in handcuffs with a spit sock on his head, sitting naked on the ground. And when he started to stand up, put his foot under his butt and stand up a little bit, they laid on him. 3 different cops laid on him. And there was one cop in particular. I'm not going to play the image or play the video here, but he was doing a plank on his neck, literally on his neck, for minutes. And then he later died as a result of asphyxiation from the onsetting of physical trauma. I think that's what the autopsy said specifically. So the cop caused his death, even according to the medical report. But what they say here is that this is a policy thing, right? This is, well, he was kind of following policy, and so we got to excuse him for that kill. There's nothing we can do about that because he's sort of within the confines of what the rules say. Here is Letitia James. She says, while I know the Prude family, the Rochester community, and communities across the country will be rightfully devastated, we have to respect this decision. The current laws on deadly force have created a system that utterly failed Mr. Prude. So what is she blaming? The current laws on deadly force. They've created a system that have utterly failed Mr. Prude and so many others before him. I get so tired of these statements from these people. Daniel Prude was in the throes of a mental health crisis. What he needed was compassion, care, and help from trained professionals. Serious reform is needed in the Rochester Police Department and other criminal justice system as a whole. I will be pursuing a multifaceted approach, including legislation, to address the very issues that have prevented us from holding officers accountable when they improperly use deadly force. I will be unshakable in my efforts to bring change that is so desperately needed. Okay, Letitia, we'll see. We have Attorney General James. She releases a statement. This is her more full statement. New York Attorney General Letitia James announced today that a grand jury voted not to indict any police officer. None. In the course of the investigation, they concluded that there was sufficient evidence surrounding the death warrant to warrant the presiding case to a grand jury. In an effort to provide maximum transparency into the case, Attorney General James is proactively releasing a comprehensive report detailing the events. We're going to go through this here at the end, but let's go through this statement first. Daniel Prude was in the throes of a mental health crisis. What he needed was compassion and care. We concluded all of that. The current laws, this is exactly what she posted on Twitter, so we don't need to read that again. While the grand jury voted not to indict any officers, serious concerns remain. She issued a number of recommendations to the Rochester Police. So nice recommendations. Okay, recommendations, great. To address these concerns, most notably related to its handling of mental health crises. Recommendations. Number 1, law enforcement officers, emergency communication providers, dispatchers, and emergency medical service personnel must be trained. So we got training again to recognize the symptoms of excited delirium syndrome and to respond to it as a serious medical emergency. They're saying he was experiencing a mental health trauma. It was excited delirium, often associated with the intake of drugs. Can be characterized by irrational behavior. Responding officers knew that he was experiencing a mental health crisis, yet they ultimately restrained him because they were unfamiliar with how to handle this type of medical emergency. Okay, so I have so many problems with this. I mean, I can't even begin to understand how it's just not. I hate to say common sense, but why would an officer? Why would they do that if they knew? In other words, why is the default that you kill people? Why is the default not, hey, this guy's maybe experiencing a mental health crisis. Maybe there's something we should do about this. Why is it that they just go, all right, well, our training and procedures say that we need to do a physical plank on this guy's neck for 2 minutes. Is that part of the policy? Did they get training to do that? Were they born that way? If they were born that way and they thought that that was okay, then why are they on the force in the first place? If they weren't born that way and that was trained, then why are you training them that way? Okay, so we're going to have some training. We're going to have some training adjustments. All right, good. Since Executive Order 147 took effect, the Attorney General Office has repeatedly observed cases throughout the state with similar factual characteristics, excited delirium. It is imperative that all police officers and emergency medical technicians be trained to recognize the symptoms and trained to respond to this serious medical emergency. Okay, so more training. Good, great. All communities should assess models for responding to crisis situations that minimize or eliminate police responses to mental health calls whenever possible. Passing Daniel's Law would greatly aid in this endeavor. They should create and implement models for responding to crisis situations. They recently released its policing reform proposal in response to Executive Order 203, which includes a person in crisis team pilot that would constitute law enforcement alternative responses. The model presently constructed in Mr. Prude's case would have been outside the purview of the PIC's response. Instead, Attorney General James recommends that the city consider a tiered approach in situations where a person is in an emotional distress that takes account any potential safety concerns. The passage of Daniel's Law, named in honor of Daniel Prude, would make significant changes to the mental health response landscape. The law would establish mental health response units. All right. Okay. So yet again, nothing that's going to address any of those officers who killed that guy. So New York should mandate de-escalation training. So more training. They should adopt a body-worn camera release policy regarding critical incidents. Okay, law enforcement agencies should explore the use of a spit sock alternative. So I get so tired of this stuff. So it's not about an officer who thinks it's okay to wrap your hands around somebody's neck and lean with your entire body weight on their body for I think we calculated it's like 2 minutes. You could hear his body collapsing in on itself. 3 officers on him, one guy putting his entire force on his neck. You could hear him verbally gurgling. You could hear things collapsing in his head. It was horrendous. But we're going to have new training. We're going to have new spit sock alternatives. That's great. And we're going to have body cameras now. That's great. So we have no discussion of culture. We have no discussion of accountability. No charges. Just gone with the wind. Nothing happens as a result of that. It's just shameful stuff. All right, so let me see if I can pull up this report here. I don't know why this link is not working. All right, so over on this screen, I apologize for that. We're going to see if I can pull up Letitia James' report over here. Looks like I have it. And this is a funny report. This is why you know that most of this is just ridiculous nonsense. So this report that she pulls out is when you take a close look at it, here's what it looks like. It's the Special Investigations and Prosecutions Unit, and it's the report on the investigation into the death of Daniel Prude. All right, so this sounds like we might get some juicy stuff out of here. Look at this thing. 204 pages. Wow, that is a long document. They must have done a very thorough analysis on this, okay? Well, the problem is when we get to about, let's see here. So it's 204 pages. When we get to page, 52, that's kind of the end of the document. What is the other 3/4 of the document? What is it? Well, it's all exhibits. All right, so we've got executive orders, Exhibit 2. We've got some findings, Exhibit 3. And then look at this. For the rest of the document, research experience. And it just keeps going and going. We've got more citations. Somebody's just copy and pasting. Just a bunch of garbage in here. Nothing that is even relevant. Oh, look, we've got a citation here in, what is this, Polish? Okay, good. So Baxter 2011, that's good. Glad we got that. We're on page 73 now, by the way. So we still got another 130 pages to go. So we just keep going. Any useful information here? No. We just have legal ombudsman. Ombudsman. We've got determinants of prisoners' decisions to seek legal aid. So more report, more copy and pasting. We've got some selected contributions over here from the Atlanta Police Department that was published in 2020, 2014 report. And it just keeps going on and on and on. Oh, look, we have a table here. So we know that this person has some editorial experience from 2015 all the way back to 1971. Great. Nobody cares. Moving on. Keep going down. We're at page 100 now. And we're just scrolling. I'm just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. Oh, look, we got another exhibit, Exhibit 4. Anything good in here? Nope. It's another resume, more timelines. It just goes on and on. For basically 3/4 of the document is this. Now I'm grabbing the scroll bar and we're just scrolling down. Publications. Got it. Just a resume dump for 150 pages of the 200-page document. Zero information in it. And so it looks good. Looks like she prepared a big, nice, thick report. Probably looks good in a binder that she's delivering on the governor's desk or whatever. But really, not much in here. Sort of a conclusion. Let's see if we can find the conclusion. Here we see some pictures here. Broken glass, Daniel Prude, ambulance. So there is good information in here. But here's what you see. Here is the plank on the neck, right? So here it is, 3:22:01 a.m. This guy, this officer right here, and it looks like what they're saying is his foot moved from 3:22:01 a.m. to 3:22:11 a.m. And it looks like he goes from a full plank onto sort of a half plank right here. You good, man? He removed his hands from his head. And he said, you good, man? P.O. said, oh, he's puking, just straight water. See all that water came out of his mouth? I didn't see it, but I see it now. He moved Mr. Prude's head. He said, my man. Mr. Prude's back appeared to move at 3:31. And again, at 3:23, it's difficult to determine from watching the footage whether the movements were actually some form of movement by Prude or whether they caused him to move. Yeah, and so he was basically dead at that point. Didn't even look like he had chest compressions, the whole thing. Horrendous. Anyways, the point is, 200 pages of documents, about 50 pages in there that is relevant. The other 150 pages is just, it's nothing, right? It's nothing. And this also doesn't have the full autopsy report either, and that's interesting. Summary of the final findings of the autopsy is attached. The full autopsy report is not included. Additionally, the OAG communicated with the medical examiner in order to assure a proper understanding. What is related below has been taken exclusively from the final autopsy report, did not refer or utilize any grand jury testimony in using this. So he had fendicycline, so I think that's PHP. And this was this is what he died for. Complications of asphyxia in setting of the physical restraint. So it was the body plank. Now I don't remember when we covered this, we basically were calculating that I think it was like 90 seconds. There's an old video of this that we went through, but he was doing a full body plank on this guy's neck for longer than 9 seconds or 10 seconds. Okay. That's not how he died, because he did it for 10 seconds. It was a long period of time, and you could hear him gurgling. You could hear his windpipe collapsing. You can hear him literally just being crushed under the weight of that officer and other officers, and no charges for that. So apparently more training is going to help root out the malfeasance in that officer's heart. I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do about it, but I'm not holding my breath on any of that stuff. Sharon Quidney says, what? You mean the cops who killed Prude are going to get off? Yep, no charges. 0 charges at all. We have Ma Fox says, why is the default use of force when clearly they're not a threat to the public or anyone in general? They're handcuffed on the ground, clearly experiencing some form of trauma. Well, Ma, according to Letitia James, it's because they didn't get enough training. They didn't know any better. The only thing they know how to do is just, I don't know, beat the hell out of people and kill them. I don't know. He was in handcuffs. He had a cover over his head. And he's dead now because of what the police did. Pinky says, no training should ever lean on a person's neck. We are people and life is precious. Yes, we are. We are. Ma Fox says, passive resistance does not warrant restraint via excessive physical force. You're right on that, Ma. You are absolutely right. Want to Know says, prosecutors know how to get a guilty from a grand jury. They do. Well, that's part of where this conversation comes in, is what was presented to them. What did they show? Daniel Cameron told us that they saw everything about Breonna Taylor. We know that was a total lie. And he's caught in it. And he's not going to pay any repercussions for it because he gave the party the outcome that they wanted. Remember, all of these law enforcement officials are basically beholden to the big police unions. There's this whole big law enforcement entity. Just like we talk about big tech and big media and big government and big military, the military industrial complex, there's a big law enforcement entity there. And they all circle up to protect themselves. Daniel Cameron had to present evidence to a grand jury to incriminate a fellow law enforcement officer. So what evidence was presented to the grand jury? Basically nothing. So that they had no option but to conclude that there wasn't enough here to support charging those officers. My question is, did the same thing happen here? It took us about a month before those grand jurors came out on the Breonna Taylor case, but they did. And it all came to light. Now, Letitia James saw what Daniel Cameron did, and she's trying to beef this up a little bit, right? Oh, I got this huge report that just came out. Well, it's 200 pages, yes. It's a big, fat, thick binder, yes. But 3/4 of it are irrelevant. What did they present to the grand jury? And did the grand jury watch the same video that we watched here? Because if they did, it's pretty clear that what they did, in my opinion, was in sort of law, they call it an indifference to human life. Depraved heart murder, sort of a cold indifference to life. That's exactly what that was. That's going back into common law, but pretty disgusting stuff. Prude was obviously in need of medical care, mental health issues, and they suffocated him. Then they get off. While I'm in favor of changes in policy, but these cops need to be held accountable. according to Sharon Quidney. I think you're right. They're not going to, though. They'll be right back on the force. They'll take some time off. They'll let all this smooth over. They'll be literally back out there doing the same damn thing. May not even get a little mark on their record, right? Because they're found not responsible for this stuff. Osak says, what's a supervening indictment in Arizona? I have 10 of them. Do I need a lawyer? Also, does it bypass any of a person's rights? So it's just a different form of an indictment. If you have 10 of them, yeah, you need an attorney. Does it bypass any of a person's rights? Then, well, no. I mean, it goes through the same formal process, but an indictment is still obtained by a grand jury proceeding. And so when you're talking about supervening, it's just sort of where it's coming into play. So if you're going to trial on a certain set of charges and you have a supervening indictment that's saying, no, we're going to add these new charges before you move in and move forward with this additional case. So it still follows the same procedure. It's not sort of it's not anything that would water down your rights. Now, if you want to have a separate conversation about whether your rights are already being watered down through a grand jury proceeding, then you can have that conversation. But no, it's nothing special that I think would cause you to raise a flag and say, well, maybe this is some sort of trampling of a constitutional guarantee. We have Joe Snow says, replying to Seji, if training led to it, then it is the duty of the police to change that training. If someone was mistrained, it is not their fault if there was not competing proper training. Thus, the reason qualified immunity is necessary for those officials, for those acting in an official capacity aggrieved. It serves a purpose, but it is widely abused. Yeah, I mean, the cops they just get away with anything. And it's very frustrating to me. Thank you, Joe Snow. It is widely abused, which is why I have so many problems with it. And then our last question of the day comes over from Nadarb Lasser. Says, just an idea, but maybe something needs to be passed that requires every police precinct to hire an on-hand psychiatrist counselor that, 1, work with officers on a daily basis and does regular mental checkups for them. 2, when a call like this comes along, that counselor rides with another officer to respond to the call. I think each department should have at least one available depending on the size of the department. Not a bad idea, Nadarb. I think that there is a lot of room for that. I think that there's no reason. I mean, literally, there's no reason. If you watch that full Daniel Prude video, there's no reason why he should be dead. None. Other than the cops acted just totally indifferent to his life, and they just didn't. I mean, I just don't think that they cared about him. He was in handcuffs, and he had a spit sock on his head. He was literally harmless. He tried to stand up. They tackled him, crushed his neck. He's dead. They could have handled that a million different ways. They didn't. They're going to be protected by qualified immunity. I would like to know what Letitia James presented to the grand jurors. Did they talk about qualified immunity? Did they say that? Did they go out there and present evidence of the police policy and say, well, he kind of fits within this policy, and there's also this thing called qualified immunity, and if you believe all that to be true, and you also believe that he was within the policy, then you have to find that there's no probable cause here to support criminal charges. And the grand jury goes, okay, well, if those are the rules, we got to play by the rules. Or was something else presented? Did they play that full video? Did they see that? Did they present any evidence from... I don't know, folks. This stuff gets me so hot because it's very reprehensible behavior that we as a society can do stuff to solve, and we're not. We get people like Letitia James and Daniel Cameron who will just tread the water of the same old sameness. It just keeps going and going and going, and we always hear more training and more resources and more body cameras and more of this and more of that. And well, we're deeply sorry for the families every time. And the people who are in charge don't do anything about it. She's the attorney general of the state. She comes out, hey, hey, Rochester Police, excuse me. Here's 5 recommendations that you guys can do to make sure maybe this doesn't happen again. Oh, by the way, I have a 200-page report. Here you go. It's a nice thick binder. Well, my job here is done. Daniel Prude's dead. Those cops are right back on the street. No justice whatsoever. And these are the people who are supposed to be the purveyors of justice. These are the people who are supposed to be protecting society to make sure that nobody does any harm to anybody in this country. And here we have officers who just kill people back on the streets. Isn't that nice? Whew. All right, my friends. Well, that was it for today. I want to thank those of you who support the show. Keep this energy going. I want to thank all of you for joining us on locals.com. Here is just a small sample of the people who have been over there supporting us. We've got CLRO, we've got Hane202, we got Scuba Babe. Big thanks to Faith. Big thanks to Ma Fox. We've got Cax Axe, Rolf77, Paula MK. We've got The Mariner. We've got Lana12. We have Dilius in the house. Jeremy Matrita in the house. Saw a lot of him today. We have J Proper in the house. We've also got Bum Lickit, Gust Click. We got Willie's Driver. And then we have some new people who signed up. We've got Ruler Law. That sounds a little bit close to home. Ruler Law. We also have KT_Sherlock. Welcome, KD. We have TOS Forever, Terms of Service for Life. We got new Ms. J. Good to have you, new Ms. J. We got Carl in the house. Look at that. Very simple name. I like that. And then we have Aunt Deb, who joined up. They're all supporting us over on this website, watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And so if you've noticed, all of those questions that we've been taking are coming from Locals. That's where people will ask their questions. And if you do that over there and you support the show, you go to the front of the queue. You get your question answered. Miss Faith is clipping those, and we will go through them. So thank you to everybody who has helped us build this little bit of a separate platform. I'm actually excited about where it's going to go. I'm trying to think about how I can add more value over on that platform. And so I'm working through a couple different things on my end, but I want to thank you sincerely for helping us build a little bit of an alternative community over on Locals. So go and check that out. If you haven't been over there, there's some good stuff over there. You can get a copy of my book for free. It's called Beginning to Winning. There's a PDF download, so you can just go and grab that. All the slides are going to be over there as well from our lovely Miss Faith. Get a copy of the impeachment template if you want it. The existence systems is something that is, I think, going to be pretty interesting, where I'm actually going to have a conversation with a friend of mine tomorrow about that on Clubhouse. So we're going to try to start doing some more Clubhouse stuff. If you're not on Clubhouse, I apologize. I think it's a pretty cool app. If you wanted to get on it, if you're an Android person, for example, I'm an Android person, but I went and got an iPad. Now I know not everybody can afford that and can do that, but if you have an old iPhone, or you can go buy an old iPhone for $50, $100, it's a pretty cool app, especially if you like to talk, and especially if you're somebody who wants to sort of debate and get into the arena of ideas. It's very easy to use, and you can get a simple iPhone, a new iPhone, a new iPod Touch even, I think would cover you. It's $199 from Apple. But we're going to start playing around with that a little bit more. So tomorrow at 2 p.m. Arizona time, I'm going to be talking with a friend of mine who runs a sober living company here in Arizona. We're going to talk about sobriety and systems, and in particular the existence system. So that's going to be taking place at 2 p.m. tomorrow on Clubhouse. You can check out the existence systems, and he actually is using a very similar structure to this. He actually might be using this structure. We're going to ask him about it a little bit. His name is Tim. Also on Locals, links in conversation, and great people as well. So a lot of awesome reasons to go over and join us there on locals.com/watchingthewatchers. Thank you for supporting us there. And lastly, but not leastly, I am a criminal defense attorney. So if you know anybody in the state of Arizona who has been charged with a crime, things like DUIs, drug offenses, domestic violence, traffic violations, major felonies, minor felonies, anytime anybody's in trouble with the law, we can help. We provide free case evaluations. We love to help good people charged with crimes find safety, clarity, and hope in their cases and in their futures. And we can help people with virtually anything. So if it's an open case, a closed case, if you have an old warrant out that you need to get cleaned up, if you want to restore your rights, if you want to remove a mugshot off the internet, we can help with all those things. It's a free case evaluation, literally nothing to lose. Come on into our office. We can schedule it over Zoom, schedule it over the phone, whatever we can do to accommodate, we're happy to do so. And we'll make sure that if you send anybody our way, they leave better than we found them or than they found us, because we're very passionate about what we do, and we're not too bad at it. We're pretty good at it. So that's it for me, my friends. I want to thank you for joining us today. We're going to be back here, same time, same place tomorrow, 5 p.m. Arizona time, which is Mountain Standard. We also have 4 p.m. in California, Pacific time. We've got 6 p.m. Central time in Texas, 7 p.m. on the East Coast. I want to thank everybody. Welcome the new supporters over on locals.com. Thank all of you for continuing to join us on this show. Have a great night. Sleep well. Have a nice dinner if you haven't already eaten, and we'll be back here tomorrow. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.